So, let's rip off the band-aid right now. At some point, you are going to die. Sorry about that, but it's the one guarantee you get along with paying taxes and having at least one bad haircut in your lifetime. Death is inevitable. It doesn't matter how many green smoothies you drink, how much sunscreen you wear, or how expensive your gym membership is. Eventually, your heart will stop beating, your lungs will stop pulling in air, and your brain will go dark. And then, the really weird, creepy, and fascinating part begins. The story of what happens to your body after you die. This is not some spooky campfire tale meant to scare you, but rather a deep dive into the fascinating biological, chemical, and even cultural processes that unfold the moment life leaves your body. And honestly, it's pretty wild. The thing about death is that it's both universal and mysterious. Every single human who has ever lived has experienced it, and yet it still feels like this big, unsolved riddle. That's part of what makes it so compelling to explore. People wonder endlessly, what happens when you die? Is there an afterlife? Do you come back in another body, or do you just become worm food? Scientists, doctors, historians, and even morticians all have their own angle on the answer. While philosophers debate the meaning of existence, biologists focus on what physically happens to your body after death. And spoiler alert, your body goes through a lot more than just closing your eyes and looking peaceful. There's bloating, discoloration, insects, and smells that can only be described as nightmare fuel. If you thought puberty was rough, wait until you hear about what your corpse goes through. But before we get into the nitty-gritty details of rigor mortis, putrefaction, and the Grand Maggot buffet, let's slow down and sit with the inevitability of the whole situation. Death is one of those things we try not to think about until we absolutely have to. It makes sense. Who wants to lie awake at night thinking about their body breaking down into gases and goo? Not exactly a lullaby, but it's also kind of freeing. Once you accept that death is unavoidable, you can look at it with a little more curiosity and maybe even some dark humor. After all, your body is basically going to audition for the most metal horror movie ever made, whether you like it or not. From a scientific perspective, the process starts immediately after your final heartbeat. Within seconds, your blood stops flowing, your brain cells start dying, and your organs begin their slow collapse. From a cultural perspective, this is the moment when people gather, whisper, cry, or say prayers. Some traditions celebrate the life you lived, while others focus on preparing your body for burial or cremation. But no matter what your beliefs are, the biology is the same. Your body starts transitioning from a living organism to a very fancy buffet table for bacteria, insects, and fungi. Nature doesn't waste anything. You might think of death as the end, but your atoms and molecules see it as an exciting new beginning. It's worth pausing on this idea. You're made up of about 30 trillion human cells, and when you die, all of those tiny workers clock out. But your body isn't empty. It's crawling with trillions of microbes, bacteria, fungi, and other microscopic squatters that have been with you your entire life. They live in your gut, on your skin, in your mouth, everywhere. Normally, your immune system and healthy bodily functions keep them under control. But when you die, it's like a prison break. With no police force to keep them in check, these microbes spread, multiply, and begin to digest you from the inside out. Creepy? Absolutely. But also weirdly poetic. You spend your whole life carrying around the very organisms that will eventually recycle you back into the earth. That recycling is one of the most fascinating things about death. Think about it. The food you ate, the air you breathed, the water you drank, all of it came from countless cycles of life and death before you. Dinosaurs, ancient plants, even microscopic sea creatures. They all decomposed, broke down, and eventually became part of the soil, the oceans, or the air. In a strange way, you've been carrying pieces of the past inside you all along, and when you die, you're just returning the favor. Your body's nutrients will feed plants, animals, insects, and eventually return to the earth. You might literally become part of someone's salad one day, thousands of years from now. Circle of life, baby. Not as glamorous as Disney made it sound, but definitely accurate. Of course, talking about decomposition isn't everyone's idea of a fun time. Some people get squeamish just hearing the word maggot. Others lean in with fascination, eager to know every grotesque detail. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, here's the truth. Your body is going to go through some pretty spectacular changes once you've taken your last breath. And those changes aren't just random grossness. They follow a pretty clear timeline. First, you cool down, then you stiffen up, then you start to smell, then you bloat, and eventually you become a skeleton. Think of it as nature's version of a checklist, and along the way, there are tons of scientific terms: rigor mortis, rigor mortis, livor mortis, that sound way fancier than your body is getting cold, stiff, and purple. So why should you care about any of this? Well, for one thing, it's actually incredibly useful knowledge. Forensic scientists, medical examiners, and archaeologists use the timeline of death to solve crimes, study ancient civilizations, and understand how humans lived in the past. If someone is found dead under mysterious circumstances, the way their body is decomposed can reveal how long ago they died, whether they were moved, or even what kind of environment they were in. It's like your body becomes its own little crime scene investigator even after you're gone. Kinda cool, right? Your corpse could literally help solve a murder case one day. CSI. You. Now, depending on your cultural background or personal beliefs, you might not be satisfied with just the scientific breakdown of what happens to your body. People want to know, what about the soul? What about consciousness? Is there really life after death? This is where things get tricky. Science can tell us in excruciating detail what happens to your cells, your organs, and your skeleton. But it can't tell us what happens to the part of you that thinks, feels, and loves. Some people believe that energy can't be destroyed, so your consciousness must go somewhere. Others think you simply fade into nothingness, like a TV being switched off. And then, there are countless religious and spiritual traditions that describe heaven, hell, reincarnation, or endless cycles of existence. No matter what you believe, the uncertainty is what keeps people asking, what happens after we die? A question that has haunted humanity since the very beginning. And honestly, the mystery is part of the fun. If we knew exactly what happens after death, it might make life feel a little less meaningful. But because we don't know, we live with curiosity, wonder, and maybe a little bit of dread. That dread fuels art, literature, and even comedy. Some of the best jokes are about death, because laughing about it makes it a little less terrifying. Think about it. Death is the ultimate punchline. No matter what you accomplish, how rich or powerful you become, or how many kale smoothies you drink, you end up in the same place as everyone else. Cold, stiff, and eventually a pile of bones. That's the great equalizer. Of course, talking about death in a PG-13 way means we're keeping it real without being too graphic. We're not going full horror movie here. We're exploring the science, the culture, and the humor that surrounds one of the most universal experiences of all time. Whether you're here because you're genuinely curious, because you like creepy science facts, or because you're just procrastinating on your homework, you're in the right place. This is the kind of information that makes you think about life differently. If your body is just a temporary arrangement of cells and chemicals, maybe it's worth appreciating every moment you're alive, while you can still eat pizza and binge-watch your favorite shows. So yes, the big question is simple. What happens after you die? The big answer is complicated. Your body goes through a step-by-step transformation. Your atoms return to the earth, and your consciousness, well, that's still up for debate. Some find that terrifying, others find it oddly comforting. Either way, you don't really get a choice. Eventually the curtain falls, the lights go out, and your body enters the strangest, creepiest science experiment of all time. And trust me, it's fascinating. We'll explore each stage in detail, from cooling down to skeletonization. But for now, just sit with the inevitability of it all. You're going to die. Sorry about that. But hey, at least you get to learn all about the weird and wonderful ride your body takes afterward. And that's the real beauty of curiosity. Even something as heavy as death can be approached with science, humor, and a little bit of wonder. So buckle up, because the ride doesn't stop when your heart does. In fact, in some ways, that's just the beginning of the most bizarre chapter of your story. The moment of death is one of those things we all imagine but never truly experience until, well, it's too late to tell anyone about it. You live your life breathing in and out thousands of times a day, your heart beating like an unrelenting metronome, and then one day, everything comes to a halt. It's not usually a dramatic movie-style gasp with swelling music in the background, but rather the quiet and inevitable collapse of the systems that have kept you alive since the day you were born. The final breath is both an ending and a transition, the exact point where the miracle of life hands over the keys to the strange chemistry of death. Science, not spirituality, can walk us through these last moments, and the truth is both fascinating and a little bit creepy. Picture yourself in the moments just before your heart stops. If you've lived long enough, your body has been through stress, injuries, colds, broken bones, and maybe even heartbreak. But through it all, your heart has kept pumping, beating about 100,000 times a day. Your lungs, expanding and collapsing, have filled your blood with oxygen and removed waste gases like carbon dioxide. The cycle is automatic. You don't have to think about it. Even when you're asleep, your body is keeping you alive without a conscious command. But in the end, the very automation that sustained you is what fails you. The electrical signals in your heart, which normally keep the chambers contracting in perfect rhythm, falter and then vanish. It's like the conductor of a great orchestra suddenly dropping the baton. Without the conductor, the music stops. When your heart fails, your entire body follows. The final breath isn't just a dramatic sigh. In many cases, people actually experience something called agonal breathing. These are gasps or irregular breaths that happen as the brainstem makes one last attempt to force air into the lungs. It doesn't mean life is returning. Instead, it's the nervous system misfiring as it loses oxygen and struggles in desperation. To an observer, it can be unsettling. The person may look like they're still alive, taking ragged breaths, when in reality, the process of dying is well underway. In scientific terms, this is your respiratory system trying to override the shutdown, like an old car engine coughing as it runs out of fuel. Eventually, those attempts stop too, and the lungs collapse into stillness. When your lungs no longer pull in oxygen, your blood oxygen levels plummet almost immediately. Your organs are used to a steady supply of fresh oxygen to power their cells. Without it, your body enters a state called hypoxia. You might feel lightheaded, disoriented, or even euphoric in those last conscious seconds, depending on the circumstances. Some people who have come close to death and returned describe tunnel vision, ringing in the ears, or sensations of floating. But what's really happening is that your brain, starved of oxygen, is shutting down in stages. Neurons fire off in chaotic bursts, releasing floods of neurotransmitters like glutamate. The electrical storm in your brain might account for those out-of-body experiences or flashes of memory some people report. Scientifically, it's the final fireworks display before the system goes offline. As the heart stops, circulation halts. The average adult has about 5 liters of blood constantly moving through arteries, veins, and capillaries. That blood carries oxygen, glucose, and all the nutrients your cells depend on. The moment the pump fails, cells start to suffocate. Some cells, like neurons in the brain, are incredibly sensitive. Within minutes, they begin to die, starved of oxygen and energy. Other cells, like those in the skin or muscles, can hang on for hours before the lack of circulation overwhelms them. This staggered death is why doctors sometimes talk about a window of revival in cardiac arrest. If blood flow can be restarted quickly, using CPR or defibrillation, some cells will spring back online. But once the cascade of cell death begins, there's no coming back. Scientifically, what does it feel like when your heart stops? Obviously, no one can send us a postcard from the afterlife describing it, but based on research and accounts from people who've gone through near-death experiences, it's not usually painful in the sense you might fear. Instead, people often describe an overwhelming fatigue, a sense of letting go, or even peacefulness. This could be due to the brain releasing endorphins in those final moments, a natural painkiller flooding the system. The body, in its last act, tries to soften the blow. Imagine your nervous system dimming the lights in the theatre before closing night. Everything grows quieter, duller, and then still. Your senses begin to shut down too. Vision fades first, with tunnel vision shrinking your field of sight. Sounds become distorted or muffled, like listening through water. The sense of touch weakens as nerves stop firing reliably. The very last sense to go is often hearing, which is why doctors and loved ones are encouraged to speak calmly and kindly to people who are dying. Even when you think they're gone, the auditory system may still be catching those last vibrations, those final words whispered into fading consciousness. In a strange way, your last moment might be shaped more by what you hear than by what you see. The brain is the star of this final act. It runs on electricity and chemistry, and when oxygen stops flowing, the delicate balance collapses. Scientists have observed that in the minutes after death, the brain doesn't just go dark like flipping a switch. Instead, there's a surge of electrical activity, a burst of organized waves that look eerily like those seen in deep sleep or intense dreaming. Some researchers believe this explains reports of vivid visions, life flashing before your eyes, or encounters with light and loved ones. In reality, it's neurons firing wildly as they run out of energy. The theatre of the mind gives one last performance before the curtain falls. The heart, lungs, and brain make up the holy trinity of life. They depend on each other, and when one fails, the rest collapse quickly. Once your heart has stopped and your lungs have fallen silent, your blood pressure drops to zero, your organs are starved of oxygen, and your metabolism grinds to a halt. Within 5 minutes, your brain cells begin to die in large numbers. Within 10 minutes, permanent brain damage is almost certain. The scientific definition of death, clinical death, is reached when there's no heartbeat, no breathing, and no measurable brain activity. After that point, even the most advanced medicine cannot bring you back. Biological death follows, the point of no return when every cell in your body begins its descent into decay. But it's important to note that dying isn't always an instant, clean moment. In many cases, it's a process. Some parts of the body linger longer than others. For example, certain skin cells and corneal cells can survive for hours after the final breath. Hair and nails don't exactly keep growing, as some myths suggest, but the skin around them shrinks and dries, making them appear longer. Muscles can twitch, reflexively firing even after death, which has led to eerie stories of corpses moving or jerking unexpectedly. These aren't signs of life returning, but rather the last electrical remnants playing out. The shutdown of the human body isn't a simple switch, but more like a city losing power grid by grid until everything is dark. Culturally, the final breath has always carried heavy symbolism. In literature and film, it's portrayed as a sigh of release, a whispered last word, a gentle exhale that signifies the soul leaving the body. Scientifically, it's more mundane, yet no less profound. It's the last mechanical movement of your lungs, the final exchange of gases, the point at which oxygen is no longer entering your system. That last breath is quite literally the border between life and death. Some cultures believe that breath is the essence of the soul, which makes sense when you think about how central it is to being alive. From your very first cry as a baby to your final exhale, breath is the soundtrack of your existence. What happens next depends on how quickly the body is discovered, cared for, or disposed of. In modern medicine, efforts like CPR or defibrillation are attempts to restart the heart and reverse the process before it goes too far. In many cases, if intervention comes within minutes, life can be restored. But without that intervention, the line between life and death is crossed permanently. It's humbling to realize how fragile it all is. The heart, that powerful muscle that beats 3 billion times in an average lifetime, can only miss a few beats before everything collapses. The lungs, capable of moving thousands of liters of air each day, only need to stop for a few minutes before the brain falters. We walk a thin line between being fully alive and being a body in transition to decay. The final breath is not the end of your story, though. In a way, it's the opening chapter of what comes after. Once the lungs stop, the cooling, stiffening, and decomposition begin. Your body shifts from being an independent organism to being raw material for countless other life forms. Bacteria surge, insects arrive, chemistry takes over. It may not be the glorious afterlife humans dream about, but it's the reality of biology. The moment your lungs fall silent and your heart stops, you've set the stage for the fascinating processes we'll explore next. Death, in all its unsettling detail, begins with that one quiet moment when the air leaves your lungs for the very last time. And while it might sound grim, there's something oddly grounding about it. You don't get to choose when or how, but you can understand it. Science takes away some of the mystery and maybe some of the fear. The final breath is not a monster hiding under the bed. It's simply biology doing what biology does. You inhale and exhale thousands of times across your lifetime, and one day, you'll just stop. The world will keep turning. The air will keep flowing, and your atoms will start a new journey. Whether you see that as tragic, comforting, or simply interesting, the fact remains that last breath is the most universal act we'll ever perform. So, the next time you catch yourself breathing without even thinking about it, remember how amazing it is that your body just knows how to keep you alive. And remember, when the final breath does come, it won't be a big cinematic moment. It will be the quiet, natural conclusion of a story that biology has been writing since the beginning of time. When you're alive, your body is basically a furnace. Every second, chemical reactions inside your cells churn away, producing energy, keeping your muscles warm, your brain sharp, and your organs functioning. You are a warm-blooded creature, which means your body does a whole lot of work just to keep you at a cozy 37 degrees Celsius. That's your baseline, the steady number that keeps enzymes working, blood flowing, and your general humanness intact. But the moment you die, the furnace goes out. The energy supply is cut. Your heart stops pushing blood. Your muscles stop generating heat. And your entire body begins its slow and steady decline toward the ambient temperature of the environment around you. This is the phase known as rigor mortis, and while the name sounds like a death metal band, it's actually the clinical term for the cooling of the body after death. So what exactly happens during rigor mortis? Well, imagine you're sitting in a room with no heater in the middle of winter. Slowly, your body heat leaks into the air around you. You start shivering, your fingers turn cold, and without movement or energy, you'd eventually freeze. In life, you fight back against the cold by burning calories, moving, and using your brain to say, "Hey, maybe I should put on a sweater." But in death, there's no fight. The second your heart stops beating and your lungs stop inflating, your body is cut off from its oxygen supply. Without oxygen, your cells can't keep up their chemical reactions. Without those reactions, there's no more heat being produced. You're essentially a hot cup of coffee left out on the counter, cooling until you match the room temperature. Scientists have studied this process extensively because knowing how quickly a body cools after death can help determine time of death, a critical detail in forensic investigations. On average, a human body loses about 0.8 degrees Celsius per hour, though this number can vary depending on environmental conditions. In other words, if you were a toasty 37 degrees Celsius when you died, an hour later you might be around 36.2 degrees Celsius. A couple hours later, 35.4 degrees Celsius. And eventually, after about 12 to 24 hours, you'll level out with whatever the room or outdoor temperature happens to be. Congratulations, you're officially as warm as your surroundings. It's like becoming one with the couch you died on or the forest floor you collapsed onto. Of course, this cooling isn't just a matter of simple math. Many factors affect the rate of rigor mortis. If you die in a chilly basement with the air conditioner blasting, your body will cool much faster than if you die in a sweltering attic in midsummer. A thin person with little body fat will lose heat more quickly than someone with more insulation. Even the clothing you're wearing matters. A body wrapped in heavy blankets may stay warm for longer, while a body left naked on a cold tile floor will shed its heat much faster. In other words, your final fashion choices might just affect how quickly you cool after death. Not that you'll be around to notice, of course. The actual mechanics of cooling follow the laws of thermodynamics. Heat always moves from a warmer object to a cooler environment until equilibrium is reached. When you're alive, your metabolism constantly replenishes lost heat. When you're dead, there's nothing left to maintain that balance, so the heat just drains away. At first, the cooling is rapid. Your skin feels cold to the touch within an hour or two. The extremities, fingers, toes, ears, nose, become icy the fastest since they have less mass and are farther from the body's core. If someone were to press their hand to your cheek a few hours after you died, they'd feel the difference immediately. That warmth that made you human fades shockingly fast. This change in temperature also alters the look and feel of the body. Warm skin flushes with color, while cold skin grows pale, almost waxy. Your once flexible muscles tighten as rigor mortis sets in. But even before that, the coolness makes you seem lifeless in a way that no movie ever quite captures. It's not just the absence of movement, but the absence of heat that drives home the reality of death. Holding the hand of someone who has recently passed is often described as jarring, not just because of the emotional weight, but because of the sudden, undeniable coldness. Humans are so used to associating warmth with life that the chill of rigor mortis feels almost alien. Forensic scientists use this cooling to estimate the post-mortem interval, or how long it's been since someone died. They do this by measuring the body's internal temperature, usually with a rectal thermometer or by inserting a probe into the liver, since that organ retains heat longer than skin. By comparing the measured temperature with the normal living baseline, they can calculate how many hours have passed. Of course, it's never perfect. Environmental variables make the cooling rate unpredictable. A body lying in a cold stream will cool much faster than one tucked inside a heated apartment. But still, rigor mortis provides a rough guideline, especially within the first 24 hours of death, before decomposition really takes over. What's fascinating is that this process is universal across all mammals. Whether it's a mouse, a cow, or a human, once life stops, the heat seeps away. The same principle applies to your pets. That's why veterinarians often talk gently about the warmth leaving an animal after it passes. It's the same slow march toward environmental equilibrium. Life is defined by the ability to resist entropy, to maintain internal temperature despite the world outside. Death is the surrender to entropy, the collapse of that resistance. Cooling is simply entropy having its way with you. The speed of cooling can also produce some strange visual effects. Sometimes condensation can form on the skin, particularly if the surrounding air is humid. The body can appear clammy, as if sweating, even though there's no biological sweating happening. It's just water vapor condensing on a cold surface. In cold environments, frost can even form on the skin or hair, giving corpses a bizarre, icy appearance. If you died outside in winter, your cooling might actually freeze you solid, preserving tissues in a state similar to cryogenic storage. Archaeologists have uncovered mummified or frozen remains thousands of years old thanks to natural refrigeration. In that way, rigor mortis isn't just a forensic curiosity, but a key to how some ancient bodies survive long after their time. While most people think of cooling as something passive, the truth is that it's intertwined with all the other post-mortem changes happening. As your temperature drops, chemical reactions in your cells slow down. Enzymes that were breaking down cell walls do so at a different rate when it's colder. Bacterial growth, the engine of putrefaction, also slows in low temperatures. This is why refrigeration is used in morgues, to delay decomposition by keeping bodies cold. Rigor mortis, left unchecked, accelerates the transition to decay, but controlled cooling can preserve a body long enough for autopsies, funerals, or transportation. In a way, science has learned to use the natural cooling process as a tool to buy time. For the living, touching a body in rigor mortis can be unsettling. The warmth we associate with life is comforting. Its absence is stark. People describe it as touching marble, stone, or wax. The skin doesn't just feel cold, it feels different, less pliable, less human. This tactile change reinforces the psychological reality of death. You can close your eyes and imagine someone sleeping, but once you feel the chill of rigor mortis, there's no mistaking it for anything other than the end. It's one of those visceral details that movies often skip over, but in reality, it defines the experience of being near the dead. There's also the psychological angle to consider. Humans have always tied warmth to life and coldness to death in myths, stories, and folklore. Ghosts are described as chilling the air. Vampires are cold to the touch. In countless cultures, warmth is linked with vitality, while cold is linked with the grave. Rigor mortis provides the scientific explanation for these ancient associations. We didn't need thermometers thousands of years ago to know that bodies lose their warmth after death. People felt it with their own hands, and it became embedded in our collective imagination. What's perhaps most haunting about rigor mortis is its inevitability. You spend your whole life maintaining that warm 37 degrees Celsius core, and in just a matter of hours after death, all of that slips away. It's a reminder of how temporary the struggle against entropy really is. We are little furnaces walking around, fighting to keep our internal temperature steady against the cold universe outside. And the moment we stop, nature reclaims us, cooling us down degree by degree until we're indistinguishable from the room around us. The very warmth that defined us as living creatures is gone, leaving only the shape of what once was. But before you sink too deeply into existential dread, it's worth noting that this process is also deeply practical. Without cooling, decomposition would proceed much more chaotically. The steady decline in temperature acts as a kind of timer, helping forensic scientists piece together events, guiding families in funeral preparations, and reminding us that even in death, biology follows rules. It's not random, it's not mysterious. It's science doing what science does. Rigor mortis might not be as dramatic as rigor mortis, with its locked muscles, or putrefaction, with its bloating and smells, but in its own way, it's just as profound. It's the first clear sign that life has ended. When a doctor pronounces time of death, one of the earliest things they notice is the cooling of the body. That chill carries a finality no words can match. Your story has ended, and nature has begun writing its next chapter with your atoms. So, if you ever wondered why bodies are always described as cold in literature or movies, it's not just a cliché, it's rooted in the science of rigor mortis. Once you die, you lose about 0.8 degrees Celsius per hour until you match the world around you. That's the cold math of mortality. You don't get to argue with physics. You can't negotiate with entropy. You simply cool and cool and cool until you're no warmer than the floor beneath you or the air above you. It's not dramatic, but it is absolute, and it's only the beginning of the much messier processes to come. When your heart stops beating and your lungs go still, it doesn't just mean your whole body instantly dies in one neat, clean moment. Instead, death ripples through you at the cellular level, like lights going out across a city during a massive blackout. At first, the downtown, the brain, goes dark because it's the most energy-hungry part of the whole system. Then the suburbs, your organs, your muscles, your skin, lose power too. But the real drama is happening under a microscope, at the level of trillions upon trillions of tiny cells. That's where the real chaos begins. Welcome to autolysis, the fancy word for cellular self-destruction, the first microscopic stage of decomposition, and the part of death that makes you realize how fragile and at the same time how fascinating the human body really is. Cells are like little self-contained factories. When you're alive, they're constantly hard at work, producing energy, transporting molecules, and maintaining the careful balance of life. They get their oxygen from your blood, their nutrients from the food you digest, and their orders from the DNA tucked safely in their nuclei. But when your heart shuts off and circulation stops, that entire supply chain grinds to a halt. No more oxygen being delivered, no more glucose being ferried in, no more waste being carried away. Your cells, once busy little factories, suddenly find themselves cut off from their lifeline. They start suffocating. The first problem is oxygen, or rather, the lack of it. Every living cell in your body depends on oxygen to fuel cellular respiration, the chemical process that turns glucose into usable energy molecules called ATP. Think of ATP as the batteries that power every process in your body, from blinking to thinking. Without oxygen, your cells can't recharge those batteries. The mitochondria, often called the powerhouses of the cell, are essentially unplugged. No electricity means no light, no heat, no life. And when that power outage hits, everything inside the cell starts to go wrong very quickly. As oxygen levels plummet, carbon dioxide levels rise. Normally, your blood carries carbon dioxide away from cells, filtering it through your lungs to be exhaled. But with your lungs no longer working, carbon dioxide builds up inside tissues. This has a nasty side effect. It mixes with water in your body to form carbonic acid, lowering the pH inside cells. In simpler terms, your cells become more acidic, like they're slowly being pickled from the inside out. Proteins and enzymes that depend on a neutral pH begin to warp and malfunction, and the carefully maintained balance that kept you alive tilts toward disaster. Then comes the true chaos. The enzymes inside your cells turn against you. Every cell is loaded with specialized enzymes, little protein machines that speed up chemical reactions. In life, they're kept neatly contained, separated by membranes, and carefully regulated so they don't do any damage. But when oxygen is gone and the cell membrane weakens, these enzymes are released from their compartments. Suddenly, the workers in the factory go rogue, smashing machinery and tearing down walls. Lysosomes, which normally help digest old cellular waste, rupture and spill their contents. Enzymes like proteases, lipases, and nucleases break down proteins, fats, and DNA itself. It's self-digestion on a microscopic scale. Scientists call this autolysis, but you can think of it as the cell eating itself alive. From the outside, you wouldn't notice this immediately. A dead body doesn't instantly collapse into a puddle of goo. But if you zoomed in with a microscope, you'd see cells swelling, membranes dissolving, and internal structures breaking apart. The orderly architecture of life, mitochondria, nuclei, endoplasmic reticulum, begins to disintegrate into an unrecognizable mess. Within minutes to hours after death, this microscopic breakdown is happening everywhere at once, from your brain cells to your liver cells to the keratinocytes in your skin. It's like the walls of a house crumbling inward, room by room, until there's nothing left but rubble. This is where things get extra creepy. The enzymes released by dying cells don't just stay put. They leak out into the surrounding tissue, spreading destruction to neighboring cells. It's like one factory collapsing and sending fire into the next. A chain reaction begins, where one dead cell releases chemicals that damage the next, and so on, until whole tissues are liquefied. This process is why, a few days after death, your organs start to soften, and your body begins to produce those infamous decomposition fluids. The very tools that kept you alive, your enzymes, are now the weapons tearing you apart. Interestingly, not all cells die at the same speed. Brain cells, because they need constant oxygen and glucose, start dying within minutes after the final breath. That's why brain damage sets in so quickly if someone isn't resuscitated after cardiac arrest. Other cells, like skin cells or bone cells, are more resilient. They can hang on for hours, sometimes even days. This staggered timeline means that while some parts of you are completely dead within minutes, other parts are still technically alive, struggling on in a hopeless fight until the chemistry overwhelms them. It's like the lights going out in a skyscraper floor by floor, until the whole building is dark. Scientists have even found that some genes actually keep functioning after death, for a while. In the hours following death, certain stress response genes switch on, trying desperately to counteract the damage. Some immune system genes keep firing, as if rallying the troops for a battle they can't possibly win. There's evidence that in some animals, developmental genes, ones normally active only in embryos, briefly spark back to life after death, as if the system is glitching. But eventually, even these last bursts of activity fade, drowned out by the overwhelming march of entropy. If you've ever wondered why corpses start to smell within a couple of days, cellular chaos is where it begins. As membranes break down and enzymes digest tissue, volatile compounds are released. Amino acids degrade into foul-smelling amines. Fatty acids break down into rancid oils. Nucleic acids fragment into smaller molecules that add to the chemical soup. This initial wave of cellular breakdown creates the perfect environment for bacteria, which move in quickly to finish the job. In life, your immune system kept those microbes under control. In death, the gates are wide open. And oh boy, do those microbes love a good corpse. Your gut alone houses trillions of bacteria that help digest your food while you were alive. The moment circulation stops and oxygen disappears, they sense the shift and start multiplying out of control. With the tissues already weakened by autolysis, bacteria can spread into places they were never meant to go, consuming sugars, proteins, and fats, and producing gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide. Those gases build up inside your body, inflating you like a grotesque balloon. But that's the next phase of decomposition. For now, in the first hours and days after death, the chaos at the cellular level is setting the stage for all of it. For forensic investigators, cellular chaos is more than just a gross detail, it's useful evidence. Under a microscope, pathologists can look at tissue samples and see how far autolysis has progressed. This helps them estimate how long someone has been dead and whether the conditions were hot, cold, dry, or wet. In warm environments, autolysis accelerates, turning organs into mush within hours. In cold or frozen conditions, the process slows, sometimes preserving tissues for weeks. This is one reason why bodies found in glaciers, bogs, or permafrost can look eerily intact, even after thousands of years. Cellular chaos is slowed to a crawl, like pressing pause on the breakdown of life. On a more philosophical note, there's something strangely poetic about autolysis. You carry inside you the tools of your own destruction. Your enzymes, your DNA, your entire cellular machinery are designed not only to sustain life, but also, eventually, to dismantle it. It's the ultimate built-in expiration date. Nature doesn't like waste. By designing cells to fall apart on their own, evolution ensured that no energy is lost, no matter goes unused. Even in death, you're part of the great recycling program of the universe. Your cells don't just vanish, they break down into components that other organisms can use. Worms, insects, plants, and eventually even other humans will carry atoms that once belonged to you. The microscopic chaos of autolysis is simply the first step in this grand handoff. The visuals of this process, if you could see them magnified, would be both beautiful and horrifying. Imagine the membranes of cells bubbling, proteins unraveling like tangled yarn, and enzymes spilling out like ink into water. At first, there's structure, recognizable organelles, distinct boundaries. Then, slowly, it all dissolves into a cloudy soup. The building blocks of life return to a more primitive state, ready to be repurposed. Scientists sometimes describe it clinically, but make no mistake. Under a microscope, the death of cells looks like a tiny apocalypse. What's wild is how this microscopic self-destruction can create macroscopic effects. The softening of tissue, the leaking of fluids, the bloating of organs. All of it starts at the cellular level. You don't notice autolysis happening as an observer, but within hours, it creates changes you can see and smell. If you've ever heard about the death smell, that unmistakable odor of decomposition, it starts right here in cellular chaos. Molecules like putrescine and cadaverine are released, chemicals so pungent that humans evolved to detect them instantly as a danger signal. It's your body's way of broadcasting to the living. Don't come too close. This is not safe anymore. In truth, cellular chaos is both the quietest and the loudest part of dying. Quiet, because it happens invisibly, molecule by molecule, without any dramatic external display. Loud, because the consequences ripple outward, changing the way the body looks, feels, and smells in ways no one can ignore. By the time the microbes take over, the heavy lifting has already been done by your own enzymes. You are, in a very literal sense, the architect of your own decay. So the next time you hear the phrase, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, remember that the journey from living human to dust begins not with dramatic collapse, but with microscopic sabotage. Your cells, cut off from oxygen, drowning in carbon dioxide, and dissolving in acid, unleash their own enzymes and reduce themselves to mush. It's not glamorous, it's not peaceful, but it is strangely fascinating. Autolysis is death at the smallest scale, and it's the stage that sets up everything that follows. In the grand story of decomposition, mortis cools the body, rigor mortis stiffens it, but cellular chaos is where the real destruction begins. It's the moment when the illusion of permanence fades and the truth of biology takes over. You are a collection of cells, and when those cells lose their balance, the whole system collapses. From the outside, you may still look like yourself for a little while, but inside, at the microscopic level, the chaos has already started, and once it does, there's no stopping it. When people think about death, they usually imagine it as a quiet, solemn event. Someone closes their eyes, exhales a final breath, and peacefully slips away. What almost never gets mentioned in movies, poems, or funeral speeches is the very real, very awkward fact that when you die, your body sometimes decides to have one last bathroom break, whether you wanted to or not. Welcome to the relaxation reflex, the stage of dying where your muscles no longer under your control, just let it all go. And yes, I mean that in the literal sense. To understand why this happens, we need to think about how your muscles work when you're alive. Every time you hold in a sneeze, lift a dumbbell, or clench your cheeks on a long car ride, it's because your muscles are contracting under orders from your nervous system. Electrical signals travel down nerves, release chemicals like acetylcholine at neuromuscular junctions, and tell muscle fibers to tighten. When you're done using them, other signals allow them to relax. You're the boss. But when you die, that chain of command is broken. No brain, no nerves, no orders. Your muscles relax completely because there's nothing keeping them tight anymore. That means everything you've been holding in, urine, feces, gas, suddenly has a chance to make a dramatic exit. Let's talk about the bladder first. While you're alive, your bladder is basically a stretchy water balloon that fills with urine produced by your kidneys. A ring of muscle called the urinary sphincter keeps that balloon sealed until you consciously decide it's time to head to the bathroom. It's one of those functions you take for granted, but it actually requires constant nerve input to stay closed. After death, that input disappears. The sphincter relaxes. If there's urine in the bladder, gravity does the rest. Out it goes, and if you happen to be lying in a hospital bed or on the floor, it can be a messy surprise for anyone standing nearby. The same principle applies to your bowels. Your large intestine is full of waste that's been processed and compacted into feces, waiting for the green light from your brain to be released. That green light controls the anal sphincter, another ring of muscle that functions like a door. When you die, the lights go out, the door swings open, and whatever was waiting gets released. It's not guaranteed that every corpse will defecate. Sometimes the intestines are empty, or the muscles stay tight a little longer, but it happens often enough that morticians, paramedics, and anyone who works around the dead knows to expect it. It's one of those facts that rarely makes it into polite conversation, but is very much part of the science of dying. And then there's gas. While you're alive, you're constantly producing gas in your intestines, thanks to bacteria fermenting food. Normally, you release it slowly and hopefully discreetly. After death, with no muscular control, gas escapes freely. That can mean a quiet hiss, a sputter, or in some cases, very loud flatulence. Yes, bodies can fart after death. If you thought death was going to be dignified, well, think again. Your final moments might be punctuated by the world's least glamorous sound effect. All of this happens because muscles are normally in a state of semi-tension called muscle tone. Even when you're not consciously flexing, your muscles have a slight contraction that keeps your body stable and your sphincters closed. When nerve signals stop, that tone vanishes. It's like cutting the power to an automatic door. It just drifts open. This is why post-mortem relaxation isn't limited to the bladder and bowels. Eyelids may open, jaws may sag, and limbs may go limp. The body loses its tightness. For a while, before rigor mortis sets in, a corpse is surprisingly floppy, almost boneless in appearance. It's unsettling and, in some cases, unintentionally funny. For paramedics and first responders, the relaxation reflex is just another part of the job. They know that when someone dies suddenly, fluids might escape. Hospitals prepare for it too. Nurses and doctors often place pads or sheets under a dying patient, not just out of respect, but because they know what's coming. Death isn't just the closing of eyes, it's the emptying of reservoirs. There's a certain irony here because many cultures and religions emphasize cleanliness and dignity at death. Families gather, rituals are performed, last words are spoken, but behind the scenes, biology is doing its own thing. Funeral directors often talk about how part of their job is restoring dignity by cleaning the body, changing clothes, and preparing it, so loved ones never have to think about what actually came out in those first few hours. The relaxation reflex might not make it into obituaries, but it's one of the most universal truths of mortality. From a scientific perspective, this reflex is valuable information. Forensic investigators can sometimes use it to help estimate the timing of death. A body found with signs of post-mortem urination or defecation might have died relatively recently, before rigor mortis tightened the muscles again. It's not a precise clock, but combined with other indicators like body temperature and rigor mortis, it adds another piece to the puzzle. Even your most embarrassing final act can serve as evidence in a courtroom one day. What's especially strange is that the relaxation reflex is sometimes mistaken by the untrained eye as a sign of life. Imagine someone collapsing, and then a few seconds later, their body twitches, gas escapes, or fluids release. To a bystander, it might look like they're still alive, still moving, still doing something. In reality, it's just biology unwinding. Death doesn't mean instant stillness. The body goes through phases, and relaxation is one of the first. Now, let's address the big question people often have, but rarely ask out loud. Is it embarrassing? Well, technically no, because you're dead. You don't feel shame, you don't feel awkward, and you're not going to be lying there thinking, oh no, not in front of my relatives. But for the people around you, it can be surprising, maybe even uncomfortable. That's why professionals in medicine and mortuary science treat it as normal. They'll calmly clean up, change bedding, and move on, because they know it's simply the biology of death. Embarrassment is for the living. The dead are beyond it. The timing of the relaxation reflex can vary. Sometimes it happens within minutes of death, especially if the person had a full bladder or bowels at the time. Other times, it may take an hour or more as muscles gradually lose tone. In rare cases, if the body is moved or handled, pressure on the abdomen can squeeze out fluids or gas, producing sudden and very dramatic effects. This is where stories come from about corpses groaning, sighing, or making noises when moved. It's not ghosts or spirits. It's just air being pushed through vocal cords or intestines by gravity and pressure. Science explains even the creepiest funeral home stories. There's also the matter of reproductive reflexes. In men, the relaxation of muscles and the buildup of gases can occasionally produce post-mortem erections, a phenomenon known as priapism. In women, relaxation can cause vaginal discharge. These details are rarely discussed publicly, but they're part of the broader picture of what muscle relaxation really means after death. It's not just about bladders and bowels, it's every muscle group losing its grip, every system letting go. Philosophically, the relaxation reflex is a reminder that life is all about control, and death is the loss of it. When you're alive, your body is a symphony of voluntary and involuntary contractions, holding things in, keeping things upright, maintaining order. Death strips that away. You go from order to entropy, from tightness to slackness, from dignity to whatever nature decides to do with you. It's humbling, maybe even funny, to realize that the same body you spent a lifetime grooming, dressing, and presenting can, in its final act, become a leaking sack of fluids. But in a strange way, that's part of the honesty of death. It doesn't hide, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't care about appearances. It just is. If you zoom in microscopically, you'll see why this happens. Muscle contraction depends on calcium ions flooding into muscle fibers and binding to proteins called troponin and tropomyosin, which allows actin and myosin filaments to slide past each other. That sliding is what creates contraction. Normally, the process requires ATP, the energy molecule. When ATP is present, muscles can contract and relax on command. When ATP disappears after death, the whole system malfunctions. At first, without nerve signals, muscles simply relax and go limp. Later, as ATP is completely exhausted, the proteins lock into place, causing rigor mortis. So relaxation isn't permanent. It's followed by stiffening. But in those first hours, relaxation dominates, and that's when sphincters fail, jaws sag, and fluids escape. It's a perfect example of how death is a sequence, not a single event. In terms of smell, the relaxation reflex also has consequences. Urine and feces contain waste products that bacteria love to consume. When they're released after death, they add to the chemical cocktail that creates the infamous death smell. It's not just decomposition gases, it's the very last offering of your digestive and urinary systems. For forensic scientists, this can provide chemical clues. For everyone else, it's simply one more reason why bodies are typically handled quickly after death. The longer you wait, the more obvious the relaxation reflex becomes. Culturally, this reality has always been known, even if it wasn't openly discussed. Ancient texts mention washing the dead before burial, a practice that almost certainly arose because bodies release fluids after death. In many traditions, preparing the dead involved cleansing and anointing, not just for symbolic reasons, but for practical ones. You don't want the deceased to be remembered as messy or smelly. The living restore dignity by taking care of what death inevitably takes away. The relaxation reflex is, in many ways, the most humanizing part of death. It strips away illusions and forces us to admit that we're animals with bladders and bowels, not just souls and stories. It doesn't matter if you're a king, a celebrity, or just an ordinary person. When you die, your muscles relax, and your body may decide to relieve itself one last time. That universal equality is oddly comforting. It reminds us that beneath all the layers of status and personality, we share the same biology. So yes, after death, your muscles release. Sometimes you pee. Sometimes you poop. Sometimes you pass gas in a way that would have made you blush while alive. And while it might sound embarrassing, it's simply science doing its job. It's the body's way of winding down, shedding the last bits of tension, and preparing for the much bigger changes to come. Rigor mortis, putrefaction, bloating, and eventually the full decomposition journey. The relaxation reflex is just the opening act, the awkward but inevitable part of the show. And maybe that's the takeaway. Death isn't always clean, pretty, or dignified, but it is fascinating, predictable, and in a way, honest. Your muscles will relax, your body will let go, and you, for once, won't have to worry about holding it in anymore. When you're alive, your blood is constantly on the move, rushing through arteries and veins like traffic on a busy highway system. Your heart is the ultimate traffic cop, pumping with enough force to push blood all the way up to your brain and down to your toes, delivering oxygen, carrying away waste, and keeping every cell in business. It's a 24/7 circulation loop, and as long as your heart is beating, the system never stops. But the moment you die, the traffic jam turns into a permanent standstill. There's no more pumping, no more forward momentum, no more Red River keeping you alive. Gravity takes over, and your blood, without anything to push it, sinks downward to the lowest parts of your body. This is where things get weird, creepy, and surprisingly colourful. The phenomenon has a name: rigor mortis, also known as post-mortem hypostasis, which is a fancy way of saying your blood pools where gravity tells it to. So what does that look like? Well, within 30 minutes to a couple of hours after death, depending on the conditions, the once rosy circulation of your skin begins to change. Blood that used to flow evenly now sinks to wherever your body is pressing against a surface. If you're lying on your back, which most corpses end up doing, blood seeps into the tissues along your backside. The result? Purple or reddish blotches, irregular patches that creep across the skin like ink soaking into paper. The rest of your skin, deprived of that warm flush of circulating blood, grows pale or even waxy. The combination is unmistakable. Parts of you are ghostly white, and parts of you are mottled in dark, bruise-like colours. It's as if death decided to paint you in two tones, and honestly, it's not flattering. The science behind this is both simple and fascinating. Blood is a liquid, and like any liquid, it obeys the laws of physics. Without a pumping heart to fight gravity, red blood cells drift downward through your veins and capillaries, settling in the lowest regions. The pressure of your body against the floor, bed, or ground means that those areas get compressed, squeezing the vessels shut and preventing blood from filling them. That's why you end up with pale patches where your body was pressed down and purple splotches everywhere else. To a forensic scientist, those pale pressure points are called contact blanching, and they're like clues on a crime scene map, showing exactly how you were positioned when you died. This discoloration is not just random ugliness, it actually tells a story. Forensic investigators love rigor mortis because it helps estimate time of death and reveals whether a body was moved. The pooling usually becomes visible within 1 to 2 hours, becomes fixed after 6 to 12 hours, and reaches full intensity by about 24 hours. Fixed means that if you try to reposition the body after that point, the bloodstains won't shift. If someone dies on their back and then gets rolled over onto their stomach 6 hours later, the purple blotches stay on the back, not the front. Investigators see that and instantly know the body was moved. It's like blood graffiti that tattles on anyone trying to stage a scene. But before we get too caught up in detective stories, let's sit with the image itself. Imagine looking at your arm a few hours after death. Instead of the normal pinkish hue, the underside looks bruised, dark, and patchy. The top side, lifted away from gravity, looks pale. The contrast is shocking. People often mistake rigor mortis for bruises, but the difference is that bruises happen in life when blood leaks out of vessels due to trauma, while rigor mortis is just blood passively pooling in vessels after death. One involves injury, the other just involves physics. Still, the visual can be unsettling. Your skin doesn't look alive anymore. It looks blotchy, stained, and unnatural. Temperature and environment play a role here too. In colder conditions, blood thickens and settles more slowly, so discoloration may take longer to appear. In warm, humid environments, it happens faster. The color itself can vary depending on the circumstances. Most of the time, it's purplish or reddish, thanks to the presence of hemoglobin in red blood cells. But in cases of carbon monoxide poisoning, for instance, rigor mortis can give the skin a bright cherry red appearance. In cyanide poisoning, it might look pinkish. These variations are not just curiosities, they're diagnostic clues that medical examiners use to determine cause of death. From a cultural perspective, rigor mortis has always contributed to the eerie image of the dead. People notice that corpses look patchy, mottled, even marbled. Literature describes them as ghostly or monstrous. And horror movies sometimes exaggerate the discoloration for dramatic effect. But the truth is, it's a natural process. Your blood simply obeys gravity once you're gone, no different from water flowing downhill. It's the same physics you've lived with all your life, only now it paints your skin in unsettling colors. There's something strangely humbling about this. You spend your whole life with blood rushing evenly throughout your body, maintaining warmth, color, and vitality. Then, within a couple of hours of death, gravity strips away the illusion. You're revealed as a bag of fluids that will settle wherever the laws of physics dictate. Your complexion, once something you carefully maintained with sunscreen, moisturizer, or makeup, is taken out of your control. No cream or powder will fix post-mortem blotches. Death makes you blotchy, pale, and undeniably gone. This pooling of blood also has consequences for how the body feels. Those areas where blood has sunk can feel heavier, thicker, even spongy under the skin. Embalmers and morticians are familiar with this texture, and they often use chemicals to restore a more even appearance for viewings. That's part of why open casket funerals require such careful preparation. Without intervention, the natural look of rigor mortis would be distracting, maybe even disturbing, to loved ones. The art of funeral cosmetics is in part about counteracting the blotchy science of gravity. Of course, rigor mortis doesn't last forever. As decomposition advances, blood cells break down, vessels rupture, and bacteria feast on the released hemoglobin. The colors of rigor mortis eventually blend into the greens, blacks, and browns of putrefaction. But in those first 24 hours, the purple blotches are one of the most striking signs that life has ended. They're a visible timestamp, marking the shift from living circulation to post-mortem stillness. Some people find this concept creepy, others find it fascinating. Either way, it's worth noting that rigor mortis is one of the earliest and most reliable signs of death. Paramedics and doctors look for it when trying to confirm that resuscitation is no longer possible. If a body shows clear, fixed lividity, it means blood has been pooling long enough that revival is out of the question. It's science's way of saying, this chapter is closed. And let's not ignore the weirdness of it all. Imagine being remembered not just for your smile, your laugh, or your hobbies, but also for the fact that after you died, gravity turned you into a blotchy patchwork of purple stains. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Everyone who dies goes through it. The queen, the rock star, the plumber, the farmer. Everyone ends up with their blood obeying gravity, painting their skin like a morbid canvas. Death doesn't care about dignity or presentation. It cares about physics and chemistry. If you zoomed in microscopically, you'd see red blood cells slowly drifting downward, like sediment settling in water. Capillaries fill up, veins swell slightly, and tissues in the lower parts of the body darken. It's eerily peaceful at that scale, just particles obeying natural laws. But step back, and the visual effect is anything but peaceful. That mottled discoloration is why people throughout history have described corpses as looking unnatural, uncanny, or ghost-like. The uncanny valley isn't just about robots, it's about how the dead look almost like us, but not quite. Forensic textbooks sometimes call rigor mortis the great truth-teller because it doesn't lie. If a body is found face down, but the lividity is on the back, investigators know someone flipped it. If the blotches are uneven, they can tell whether something was pressing against the skin, like a belt or rope. If the colors are unusual, bright red, pink, or deep black, they can narrow down possible toxins or causes of death. Your blood, even after you're gone, still has a lot to say. Philosophically, there's something profound about this stage. You are, quite literally, marked by gravity. The same force that kept your feet on the ground all your life now pulls your blood downward in death, creating a visible reminder that the laws of the universe always win. We like to think of ourselves as exceptions, special beings above the rules of nature. Rigor mortis is the reminder that no, you're still matter, you're still liquid, you're still subject to physics. Death is the great equalizer, and gravity is its assistant. The timeline of rigor mortis also ties into the next stages of decomposition. As blood settles and stains the tissues, oxygen deprivation and bacterial invasion start to change the chemistry of those areas. The purple blotches can merge into larger regions, blending with the greenish hues of putrefaction. Over time, those once distinct patterns fade into the larger decay of the body. But for those first crucial hours, it's one of the clearest signs that life has ended and that the body is beginning its slow transformation into something else entirely. So if you ever wondered why corpses in crime dramas are described as cold and mottled, or why investigators mention lividity when estimating time of death, now you know. It's not just TV jargon, it's the science of blood on the move. Your circulation stops, gravity takes over, and your once uniform skin turns into a map of purples and whites. It may be creepy, it may be unsettling, but it's also strangely beautiful in its inevitability. The truth is, death doesn't care about keeping you photogenic. Once your heart stops, your blood obeys gravity, your skin discolors, and your body tells the world in blotches and stains that you are no longer alive. And while it might sound grim, it's just one more reminder that biology is honest. Life is circulation. Death is stillness. And stillness lets gravity paint its story on your skin. When you're alive, your muscles are amazing machines. They bend, stretch, contract, and relax on command, letting you do everything from running a marathon to holding in a sneeze at a quiet library. Behind the scenes, this flexibility is powered by energy molecules called ATP, which fuel the microscopic sliding of protein filaments inside each muscle fiber. It's a constant dance, one that goes on all day and all night, even while you sleep. But the moment you die, that dance grinds to a halt. At first, your muscles relax, giving you the floppy, boneless quality of a rag doll. Then, in one of the most dramatic transformations of the death process, the very proteins that made your muscles work seize up and lock in place. Your body becomes stiff, rigid, and unmoving, like a mannequin in a store window. This eerie transformation is known as rigor mortis, and it's one of the most reliable and creepy signs of death. So what causes this stiffness? The secret lies in the microscopic machinery of your muscles. Each muscle fiber is made up of bundles of actin and myosin filaments. When you're alive, your body sends electrical signals that release calcium ions, which allow these filaments to slide past each other. This sliding action is what makes your muscles contract. To stop contracting, you need ATP to detach the filaments and reset them for the next movement. In life, Your body produces ATP constantly by burning glucose and oxygen. But in death, the oxygen supply disappears and ATP production crashes. Without ATP, those actin and myosin filaments get stuck together. They can't slide, they can't release, and the muscles freeze. It's like a zipper getting jammed. Once it locks, it's not moving again until the whole thing breaks down. This process doesn't happen instantly. It usually begins 2 to 6 hours after death, depending on the environment. It often starts with the small muscles in your face and jaw. That's why the first signs of rigor mortis can be a stiff jaw, a frozen grimace, or eyelids that no longer close smoothly. From there, it spreads downward into the neck, arms, torso, and legs. Within about 12 hours, your entire body may be as rigid as a board. You can't bend the elbows or knees, fingers curl stiffly, and the body takes on an unnatural stiffness that looks and feels unsettling. It's like your body is auditioning for a wax museum without anyone asking you to. The stiffness lasts for a while, but it's not permanent. After about 24 to 36 hours, decomposition advances to the point where muscle fibers begin to break down. Enzymes and bacteria start dissolving the proteins that cause the lock, and the rigidity fades. By about 3 days, rigor mortis passes, and the body becomes floppy again. That's why forensic investigators pay close attention to this stage. It's a temporary window of time that tells them a lot about when someone died. If the body is stiff but not fully rigid, death likely occurred less than 12 hours ago. If the body is stiff throughout, it's probably between 12 and 24 hours. If the stiffness is gone, the death may have been 2 to 3 days earlier. Cops and coroners love rigor mortis because it's like nature's built-in stopwatch. Of course, as with every part of death, there are variables. Temperature plays a huge role. In hot environments, rigor mortis sets in faster and passes more quickly because chemical reactions accelerate with heat. In cold conditions, the process slows dramatically, sometimes taking up to a day to begin and lasting several days before it fades. The person's physical condition matters too. Muscular individuals with a lot of stored energy may experience stronger rigor. Those who died after extreme exertion, like running or convulsing, may go stiff more quickly because their ATP reserves were already depleted. Even cause of death can alter the timeline. Poisoning, drowning, and sudden cardiac arrest all leave different signatures on how rigor mortis develops. The strange thing about rigor mortis is that it can make corpses look uncannily alive in certain ways. Because the muscles contract as they lock, bodies can sometimes assume odd poses. Hands may clench into fists, arms may bend slightly, or legs may straighten unnaturally. In rare cases, rigor mortis has been strong enough to cause a body to sit upright or clench an object tightly in the hand. This has fueled ghost stories and myths throughout history. Imagine stumbling upon a corpse that looks like it's still gripping a weapon, or one with its face frozen in a terrifying expression. To the untrained eye, it might look like the person is still resisting, still fighting, or even moving. But in reality, it's just proteins doing their rigid work. From a forensic science perspective, rigor mortis is part of the holy trinity of post-mortem changes, along with algor mortis, cooling, and livor mortis, blood pooling. Together, they form the backbone of time-of-death analysis. Investigators combine these signs with other evidence to narrow down when death occurred. For example, a body that is cold, stiff, and blotchy probably died within the last day. A body that is warm, floppy, and has no discoloration may be only a couple of hours dead. This is why crime shows love to drop the phrase, time of death estimated at 12 hours. They're basing it on the reliable clockwork of rigor mortis and its companions. There's a darker side to this stage too. Rigor mortis can make handling the dead much more difficult. Morticians, paramedics, and crime scene technicians often have to work around stiff limbs that won't bend, or bodies that won't fit neatly into bags or coffins. Sometimes they need to massage or even break the stiffness to position a body correctly. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary. Anyone who has worked with the dead knows that rigor mortis is more than just a scientific curiosity. It's a very physical, very stubborn reality that you can feel in your own hands. If you zoom in microscopically, rigor mortis is all about proteins and chemistry. Actin and myosin, the building blocks of muscle fibers, are designed to stick together temporarily during contraction. A TP comes along, unhooks them, and lets them slide apart so the muscle can relax. In death, ATP is gone. The myosin heads latch onto actin and just stay there, like Velcro that never releases. Calcium floods into the muscle fibers and stays there too, adding to the lock. It's a microscopic traffic jam that turns into a full-body freeze. Scientists can even reproduce rigor-like stiffness in lab experiments by removing ATP from muscle tissue, proving that energy supply is the key. Culturally, rigor mortis has fascinated people for centuries. In ancient times, the stiffening of the dead was seen as a sign that the soul was lingering or that the body was resisting burial. Superstitions about vampires, zombies, and restless spirits often borrowed from the unsettling look of rigor mortis. A body found with stiff limbs or a twisted pose could easily be interpreted as trying to rise again. In literature, the phrase cold and stiff became shorthand for death itself, a phrase still used today. Even though we now know the science, the image remains powerful. Stiffness looks unnatural, uncanny, and it lingers in the imagination. One of the most peculiar aspects of rigor mortis is how temporary it is. For a while, you're frozen, locked into place like a statue. Then, just as suddenly, you loosen up again as decomposition advances. If you were to watch the process sped up in a time lapse, you'd see a body go from floppy to stiff to floppy again, like some eerie puppet show. The stiffness doesn't last because bacteria, enzymes, and chemical reactions eventually break down the very proteins causing the lock. It's a reminder that every part of decomposition is connected. One stage sets up the next, and rigor mortis is no exception. In practical terms, rigor mortis also matters for organ donation and medical science. If someone dies in a hospital and is a registered donor, surgeons need to work quickly because once rigor sets in, tissues become harder to work with and organs begin to deteriorate. The timeline of stiffness isn't just an academic curiosity, it has real consequences for saving lives. Timing matters, and rigor mortis is part of that ticking clock. Philosophically, the stiffening of the body is one of the most striking reminders that you are, in the end, a machine made of proteins, energy, and chemistry. We like to think of ourselves as complex beings with thoughts, feelings, and souls. And we are, but underneath it all, we're also bundles of muscle fibers that depend on energy to stay flexible. When that energy is gone, so is the flexibility. You literally become locked in place by your own biology. It's humbling, maybe even frightening, to realize how mechanical it all is. But there's also a strange beauty in it. The same proteins that helped you smile, dance, hug, and hold a pencil are the ones that stiffen you in death. They served you faithfully for decades, and then, in the end, they close the show by freezing in place. It's like the curtain falling at the end of a play, the stage lights shutting down, the actors holding still one last time before vanishing into the dark. Rigor mortis is your body's final bow. So yes, after you die, your muscles stiffen. It starts in your jaw, creeps down into your limbs, and locks you up like a mannequin. It lasts about 3 days before fading And in the meantime, it tells forensic scientists exactly when you died, and sometimes even whether your body has been moved. It's creepy, it's useful, and it's one of the most dramatic transformations in the death process. And just like everything else that happens after death, it's not random. It's biology, chemistry, and physics doing exactly what they've always done, only now without you steering the ship. You spend your life in motion, always bending, stretching, moving, and adjusting. In death, rigor mortis takes that motion away. For a little while, you're frozen, stiff, immovable. And then, as decomposition takes over, you're released again into the long, slow unraveling of decay. It's not glamorous, but it's the truth. Death is not just the end of consciousness, it's a series of transformations, and stiffness is just one chapter in the book. If rigor mortis was your body's stiff final bow, then putrefaction is when the curtain really comes down and the stage collapses under you. Up until now, death has been about shutting off systems, cooling down, blood pooling, and proteins locking muscles in place. Creepy, sure, but still a little clean, a little clinical. Putrefaction is where things get messy, smelly, and downright grotesque. This is the stage where your gut bacteria throw the biggest buffet party in history, and the guest of honor is you. Remember, even while you were alive, your body was never just you. Trillions of microbes lived inside your intestines, happily digesting your food, making vitamins, and generally being your little microscopic roommates. Most of the time, they were kept in check by your immune system and confined to the digestive tract. But once you die, your immune system clocks out. There are no more white blood cells patrolling, no more barriers holding bacteria in place. The gates are wide open, and when the gates open, those microbes surge outward with glee. Your gut, packed with organic material and moisture, becomes the perfect incubator. Within hours, bacteria multiply like crazy and begin digesting tissues you used to call your own. The chemistry of this microscopic feast is what makes putrefaction so infamous. As bacteria consume proteins and carbohydrates, they release gases as waste products: methane, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide, among others. These gases don't just disappear, they build up inside your body, inflating your abdomen like a grotesque balloon. What was once a flat stomach becomes swollen, distended, and stretched tight. Sometimes the pressure grows so great that fluids and gases force their way out of your mouth, nose, and even eyes, creating horrifying leaks that look like something out of a nightmare. And yes, in extreme cases, the pressure can cause the abdomen to rupture. Imagine the worst piñata you've ever seen, only nobody's celebrating when it bursts. The smell of putrefaction is legendary, and not in a good way. When people talk about the smell of death, this is what they mean. Volatile organic compounds like putrescine and cadaverine are released as amino acids break down, and the odor is revolting enough to make even experienced professionals gag. It's so distinct, in fact, that cadaver dogs are trained to recognize it instantly. Scientists have identified over 400 different chemical compounds that make up the scent of decomposition, but together they produce an odor unlike anything else on Earth. Sweet, sickly, sulfurous, metallic, and rancid all at once. It's the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and your memory forever. Morticians, coroners, and forensic teams will tell you that you never forget your first experience with it. No candle or air freshener can compete with nature's strongest warning signal. Evolution designed us to be repulsed by that smell, so we'd stay away from disease and contamination. Visually, putrefaction transforms the body into something almost unrecognizable. Skin starts to turn greenish as hemoglobin in blood breaks down and reacts with hydrogen sulfide to form sulfhemoglobin. The green spreads across the abdomen first, then into the limbs, until the whole body looks sickly, mottled, and alien. Blisters form as gases accumulate under the skin, and those blisters can peel away, leaving raw, moist tissue exposed. Eyes bulge from pressure, tongues protrude, and hair may loosen from follicles. Insects arrive in droves, especially blowflies, which lay eggs in every moist crevice they can find. Within a day or two, maggots hatch and join the buffet, wriggling through tissues, breaking them down even faster. Beetles and other scavenging insects follow, turning the body into a writhing ecosystem. It might sound like horror, but for scientists, it's predictable biology. Putrefaction follows a clear timeline. Within 24 to 72 hours, the first green patches appear on the skin. By 3 to 5 days, bloating is intense, the smell unmistakable, and fluids begin leaking from natural openings. By 1 to 2 weeks, tissues are liquefying, maggots are in full force, and the body is barely recognizable as human. By the 3rd week, the process of liquefaction is well advanced, leaving behind mostly skeleton, cartilage, and tough connective tissues. Climate, temperature, humidity, and burial conditions all affect the speed, but the general pattern is universal. Whether you're a farmer in the Middle Ages or a billionaire in the 21st century, your microbes don't discriminate. Forensic science loves putrefaction, not because it's pleasant, but because it's useful. The stages of rot provide investigators with more data points for estimating time of death, the degree of bloating, the color of the skin, the presence of maggots. All of these can be used to narrow down when someone died. Entomologists, scientists who study insects, can even determine time of death by analyzing which stage of fly larvae is present. Blowflies arrive within minutes of death, lay eggs, and their maggots hatch on a predictable schedule. By examining their size and development, investigators can pinpoint death within hours or days. So while your gut bacteria may be having the time of their lives, they're also creating evidence that could solve crimes. The strangest part of putrefaction is how much of it is just biology doing what it always does, only without you steering the ship. You've carried these bacteria with you since birth. They helped you digest your food and contributed to your immune system. In life, they were your allies. In death, they're your dismantlers. There's something almost poetic about it. The very organisms that kept you alive are the ones that recycle you back into the earth. Your body isn't wasted. It's transformed into nutrients, gases, and building blocks for the next generation of life. As gross as it seems, putrefaction is just another step in the cycle of nature. Of course, humans don't always want to deal with that reality. That's why so many cultures developed rituals around burial, embalming, and cremation. Embalming is essentially an attempt to stop or slow putrefaction by replacing your body fluids with chemicals that kill bacteria and harden tissues. Refrigeration in morgues serves the same purpose, delaying the microbial party by keeping everything too cold for rapid growth. Cremation, on the other hand, skips the entire process and reduces you to ash in hours. But without those interventions, putrefaction is inevitable. Nature always wins. The bloating stage of decomposition is especially infamous in popular imagination. Corpses have been known to make noises when gases escape, sometimes sounding like groans or sighs. If pressure forces air past the vocal cords, a body can literally sound like it's speaking, which has terrified countless mourners and gravediggers through history. In reality, it's just physics and gas pressure, not ghosts. But the effect is so eerie that it fueled centuries of folklore about the undead. Vampires, zombies, and restless spirits all have roots in observations of putrefying bodies. A bloated corpse with bulging eyes and darkened skin could easily look like something rising from the grave. People in the past didn't know about bacteria and gas. They just saw the result and spun supernatural tales. If you've ever left food out too long and smelled the rancid stench of spoiled meat, you already know a hint of what putrefaction is like. The difference is scale and intensity. A steak in the trash might smell bad, but an entire human body decomposing outdoors can clear an area. That's why disaster recovery teams, war historians, and archaeologists all talk about the unforgettable scent. It's not just a smell, it's a biological alarm bell. And while it's revolting, it's also vital. By being repulsed, humans instinctively avoid disease and contamination, protecting themselves from pathogens that thrive in rotting flesh. There's another eerie aspect to putrefaction: the fluids. As tissues break down, cell membranes rupture and liquids seep out. This purge fluid is dark, sticky, and often mistaken for blood, especially when it oozes from the nose or mouth. In reality, it's a mixture of decomposed tissues, blood cells, and bacterial byproducts. It stains clothing, carpets, and soil, and it adds to the smell. In crime scenes, these fluids are a clear sign that putrefaction is underway. For forensic cleanup teams, they're also a nightmare to remove. Once they seep into porous surfaces, the smell can linger for weeks. And yet, for all its horror, putrefaction is deeply important. Without it, ecosystems would collapse. Imagine if dead animals and people simply stayed intact forever. Forests, fields, and oceans would pile up with bodies, and nutrients would be locked away instead of recycled. Microbes and insects are the world's greatest recyclers, ensuring that death feeds life. The gases, liquids, and solids produced during putrefaction nourish soil, enrich plants, and sustain the cycle of growth. So while it's the least glamorous stage of your post-mortem journey, it's also one of the most necessary. Philosophically, putrefaction is the stage that strips away any lingering illusions. Cooling and stiffness are still recognizable as part of the person you knew, but rot transforms the body into something unrecognizable, alien, and terrifying. This is the stage when loved ones say, yes, they're gone, because the physical body no longer resembles the living person. It's confronting, yes, but it's also freeing. It reminds us that what mattered most about someone wasn't their flesh, but their presence, their thoughts, their interactions. When the body rots, what's left is memory and impact. So what happens when the rot begins? Your bacteria take over. They launch their buffet, tearing through tissues, releasing gases, bloating your belly, and painting your skin green, purple, and black. Fluids ooze, smells overwhelm, and insects swarm. It's grotesque, yes, but it's also predictable and strangely poetic. You are dismantled piece by piece, liquefied into a soup of molecules that will one day nourish new life. The smell may be legendary, but so is the purpose. Putrefaction is nature's way of saying nothing goes to waste. And that's the beauty of science. Even in the creepiest, smelliest chapter of existence, there's order, reason, and purpose. You're not just rotting, you're recycling. The stage may look and smell like horror, but at its core, it's life, continuing through death. If you thought putrefaction was as gross as it gets, I've got some bad news for you. The rot doesn't just quietly liquefy you and call it a day. Oh no. Death likes to add some visual drama to the performance, and that's where balloon mode comes in. Imagine your body turning into a grotesque human balloon animal, swollen, stretched, and threatening to pop at any moment. This stage of decomposition is one of the most infamous, not just because of how it looks, but because of the sheer chaos it causes. We're talking about gases building up inside you, liquids finding their way out, skin stretching until it's tight like overinflated rubber. And yes, sometimes even bursting. Welcome to balloon mode, the stage of death that horror movies could never fully capture. The setup begins with bacteria. After you die, your gut microbes, freed from the shackles of your immune system, go wild digesting your tissues. As they feast, they release gases: methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and ammonia, just to name a few. These gases don't just float away into the air. They're trapped inside your body cavities, filling your intestines, stomach, and even your chest. Think of it like fermentation gone wrong. If you've ever opened a swollen carton of spoiled milk or a bulging can of food and been hit with a nasty hiss of gas, you've seen the same principle at work. The difference is that here, the carton is you. As the gases accumulate, they cause your abdomen to swell. At first, it's subtle, like a bit of bloating after a big meal. But within a few days, the pressure builds until your belly is grotesquely distended, sticking out like you're several months pregnant. Skin stretches tight, veins bulge, and the body looks unnatural, almost cartoonish in its proportions. The face isn't spared either. Pressure forces tissues in the head and neck to swell, pushing out the tongue and eyeballs. That's right. Your eyes can bulge, and your tongue can protrude from your mouth like some terrifying caricature. This is one of the reasons bloated corpses have fueled so many vampire and zombie myths. People in the past would open graves and see bodies that looked swollen, red and fresh, with blood-like fluid seeping from the mouth, and they thought, undead monster. Science says, balloon mode. The smell, of course, becomes even more unbearable at this point. Those gases aren't just expanding inside you, they're seeping out through every available opening: mouth, nose, ears, genitals, even pores. Each puff carries the chemical cocktail of decomposition: cadaverine, putrescine, sulfur compounds. It's a stench so powerful it can clear entire fields. Search and rescue dogs are trained to detect it from miles away. Mortuary workers will tell you it seeps into clothes, walls, even hair, and clings there no matter how many showers you take. Balloon mode isn't just a visual horror show, it's an olfactory one. With the swelling and pressure comes another gruesome side effect: leakage. As gases expand, they force fluids out of blood vessels and tissues. Dark purge fluid, a mixture of decomposed blood, tissue juice, and bacteria, may ooze from the mouth and nose, dripping down the face and onto clothing. This fluid often looks like thick blood, which only added to old-time superstitions about corpses feeding on the living. In reality, it's just physics. The internal pressure needs release, and liquids take the easiest exit routes. For families or investigators encountering it, the sight can be shocking, but for scientists, it's just the expected progression of decay. The skin doesn't always handle the strain gracefully. In many cases, gases stretch tissues until they blister. These blisters, filled with foul-smelling liquid, can pop, spilling fluids onto the surrounding area. Skin can slip away from underlying layers, creating patches where it peels off in sheets. This is known as skin slippage, and it makes bodies look even more alien and disturbing. Sometimes hair and nails seem to keep growing during this stage, but really, it's just that the skin around them has shriveled and pulled back, giving the illusion of longer growth. Combined with bloating and discoloration, the effect is nightmare fuel. In extreme cases, balloon mode really does live up to its name, and bodies burst. The buildup of gas inside the abdomen can become so intense that the skin and muscles tear, splitting open with a release of pressure. When that happens, the gases escape in a rush, carrying fluids and chunks of tissue with them. This kind of rupture is most likely to happen in hot environments where bacteria are working overtime. It's gruesome to witness, and even worse to clean up. But it's a real phenomenon. Historical accounts from plague pits and battlefields often describe exploding corpses. And while it sounds like myth, it's biology. When you're basically a sealed container full of gas, popping is always a risk. Forensic investigators actually rely on this stage as a time marker. The degree of bloating tells them how far decomposition has progressed. Slight bloating might mean a few days have passed since death, while extreme distension suggests a week or more, depending on climate. Balloon mode is a clock, and trained eyes can read it. Insects also love this stage, since the stretched skin and leaking fluids make it easier for maggots to spread. Blowflies that arrived earlier now find the whole body accessible, turning the balloon into a crawling buffet. Beetles join in too, gnawing at tougher tissues. The body becomes a full-fledged ecosystem, bustling with life, while it inflates like a grotesque carnival attraction. Culturally, the sight of bloated corpses has terrified humanity for centuries. In medieval Europe, people believed that swelling was proof of vampires feeding inside their graves. In other traditions, bloated bodies were seen as punishments for sin, grotesque warnings to the living. In reality, it's the same bacteria and gases that cause bread to rise or cheese to ripen, only here the recipe is your flesh. Biology doesn't care about dignity, it cares about chemistry. One of the eeriest parts of balloon mode is the sound. As gas shifts inside, bodies can produce gurgles, squeaks, or even loud pops. When pressure forces air past the vocal cords, corpses can emit moans or groans that sound disturbingly human. For centuries, grave diggers swore they heard the dead speaking. Today, we know it's just physics and airflow, but that knowledge doesn't make it less creepy when it happens. Imagine being in a morgue late at night and hearing what sounds like a sigh or a grunt from a table nearby. Science explains it, but your spine would still tingle. If you zoomed in to the microscopic level, balloon mode is just the continuation of bacterial metabolism. Anaerobic bacteria, which thrive without oxygen, are breaking down proteins and carbohydrates, releasing hydrogen sulfide that turns tissues green, methane that inflates the gut, and ammonia that adds to the stench. The chemical reactions are predictable, even measurable. Scientists studying decomposition farms, known as body farms, monitor these gases to better understand timelines of death. By analyzing which compounds are present in the air, they can refine forensic estimates. Balloon mode, while grotesque, is also a goldmine of data for science. Environment plays a huge role in how balloon mode unfolds. In dry, arid conditions, bodies may desiccate before gases can fully inflate them, leading to mummification instead of bursting. In water, bloating still occurs, but pressure may cause bodies to float to the surface. This is why drowned bodies often resurface after a few days. They've literally turned into balloons. In sealed coffins, gas buildup can cause lids to bulge or even pop off if pressure gets too extreme. Every setting produces its own version of the balloon effect, but the underlying process is the same. Bacteria plus tissue plus time equals inflation. Philosophically, balloon mode is death at its most undignified. If rigor mortis was stiff formality and putrefaction was smelly chaos, this is slapstick horror. Your body, once a finely tuned machine, is reduced to a bag of gas, threatening to blow. It's hard not to laugh nervously at the idea, even as it creeps you out. Death doesn't care about appearances, and balloon mode proves it by turning everyone into a swollen caricature. Rich, poor, powerful, ordinary. Everyone inflates the same. Yet, as with every stage of decomposition, there's a strange beauty in it. The gases that bloat you will eventually escape into the atmosphere, feeding plants and fueling microbes. The fluids that leak will enrich soil. Even the bursting, gruesome as it is just the release of pressure that allows decomposition to continue. Balloon mode isn't just horror, it's transition. It's your body breaking down into smaller parts, preparing to return to the cycle of life. So yes, in death, you swell. Your belly balloons, your face distorts, your skin blisters, and fluids leak. Sometimes the pressure grows so great that you pop. The smell announces you long before anyone sees you. Insects crawl, gases hiss, and physics writes the script for one of nature's strangest spectacles. It's grotesque, it's unforgettable, and it's as inevitable as every breath you ever took while you were alive. Balloon mode is death's punchline, a reminder that biology doesn't care about dignity, only about process. And while it may sound like nightmare fuel, it's also proof that even in your most horrifying stage, you're still part of the endless cycle of energy and matter that keeps the world alive. If you thought bacteria were ruthless little recyclers, wait until you see what the insects have planned. Bacteria may get the first bite of you, but when you enter balloon mode and start leaking gases and fluids, the smell is like an all-you-can-eat buffet invitation written across the sky in neon. Insects have evolved for millions of years to detect that scent, and they are very, very good at it. Within minutes, sometimes even seconds after death, the bug invasion begins. The humble housefly, the blowfly, the carrion beetle, all of them are nature's cleanup crew, and when you die, you become their 5-star dining experience. The first to arrive are the blowflies. These green and blue metallic beauties may not look glamorous buzzing around your picnic, but they are the undisputed champions of corpse detection. Their antennae can pick up the faintest whiff of decomposition gases from over a mile away. That little tickle of putrescine and cadaverine in the air tells them dinner is served. Once they land, they waste no time. Female blowflies crawl into moist openings like the eyes, nose, mouth, and genitals, searching for the perfect place to lay their eggs. Why? Because a rotting body isn't just food for them, it's also the perfect nursery. Within a day, those eggs hatch into wriggling maggots, little white rice-shaped larvae that waste no time burrowing into soft tissues. And when I say waste no time, I mean it. Maggots are some of the most efficient eating machines on Earth. They don't chew politely. They secrete enzymes that liquefy flesh, turning solid tissue into a kind of protein soup they can slurp up. Imagine an army of tiny straws, all drinking at once. Within a few days, a swarm of maggots can strip away layers of skin and muscle with terrifying efficiency. To the untrained eye, it looks like the body is crawling and writhing on its own. But really, it's just millions of larvae feeding, moving as one massive colony. Creepy? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. And flies aren't working alone. As maggots grow, other insect species arrive to join the feast. Flesh flies, larger and striped, skip the egg stage altogether and deposit live maggots directly onto the body, jump-starting the process. Carrion beetles, with their black and orange shells, crawl under the skin folds and into the orifices, laying their eggs and feeding on tissues. Hide beetles and dermestid beetles follow later, gnawing on tougher, drier parts of the body that maggots can't handle, like cartilage, hair, and even bone coverings. Each species specializes in a different stage of decomposition, like a relay race where the baton is your corpse. It isn't just about eating flesh. Many insects also compete for dominance. Some beetles don't just eat the corpse, they eat the maggots. They'll crawl among the larvae, snapping up the fattest ones, thinning out the swarm, so their own offspring have more space to grow. Ants may also arrive, carrying away small bits of tissue or larvae. Spiders might set up webs nearby, hoping to catch flies coming and going. A dead body quickly becomes its own micro-ecosystem, a writhing food web with dozens of species all interacting in ways both cooperative and competitive. What looks like chaos is actually nature's recycling squad in action, each bug doing its job to break you down and return you to the earth. From a forensic standpoint, this bug invasion is a goldmine of information. Forensic entomologists, yes, that's a real job, study the life cycles of these insects to estimate time of death. Blowflies lay eggs within minutes. Those eggs hatch within 24 hours. The maggots pass through 3 larval stages, called instars, growing larger each day. After about a week, they crawl away to pupat, and within 2 weeks, new adult flies emerge. By examining the size and development of maggots on a corpse, scientists can calculate how long the body has been dead with surprising accuracy. In fact, in some cases, insect evidence has been more reliable than body temperature or rigor mortis. Bugs don't lie, they keep their own strict schedules, and their stomachs are excellent clocks. The scale of insect activity can be shocking. In warm, humid climates, thousands of flies can descend on a body in hours, laying tens of thousands of eggs. Within a few days, those eggs become a pulsating sea of larvae, each one devouring tissue around the clock. A human body left outdoors can be reduced to bones in just a couple of weeks, thanks largely to maggots. Farmers and ranchers have long observed this with livestock carcasses, and modern science has confirmed it through research at body farms. These research sites place donated human bodies in controlled outdoor environments to study how insects and microbes interact during decomposition. They've shown again and again that bugs are the MVPs of the breakdown process. But let's talk about the gross factor, because balloon mode plus bugs is where things get visually overwhelming. Imagine a bloated, green-tinged body leaking fluids while hundreds of flies swarm above it in a buzzing cloud. On the surface, maggots writhe in squirming mats, their white bodies contrasting with dark, decaying flesh. If you lift a patch of skin, you might find thousands more underneath, hidden away from the light, eating from the inside out. The heat generated by a dense maggot colony can even raise the temperature of the area by several degrees, speeding decomposition further. Yes, maggots can cook themselves a little oven inside you. Lovely. The sound is unforgettable too. If you lean close to a maggot-ridden corpse, and please don't, you'll hear a soft crackling, a wet squirming noise as they move in waves across tissue. For mortuary workers and forensic scientists, that sound is as distinctive as the smell. It's the sound of nature hard at work, stripping away the old to make room for the new. For the squeamish, though, it's the stuff of nightmares. Different climates create different insect invasions. In tropical regions, decomposition is rapid and bugs are active year-round. In colder climates, insect activity slows or stops altogether, preserving bodies longer. In deserts, bodies may dry out quickly, creating mummies instead of maggot buffets. But wherever conditions allow, bugs always show up. It's part of their role in the ecosystem. Without them, dead animals and people would linger much longer, clogging up the natural cycle. Flies, beetles, and their larvae may gross us out, but they're indispensable recyclers. They take death and turn it back into life, one bite at a time. The bug invasion also influences how we've dealt with death culturally. Many burial practices are, at their core, attempts to avoid insects. Coffins, embalming, cremation, all of these reduce or prevent access to the body by flies and beetles. Ancient Egyptians went to extraordinary lengths to mummify and seal bodies to keep bugs away. Modern morticians inject embalming fluid that kills bacteria and deters insects. Cremation bypasses the problem entirely. Deep burial was also a practical solution, out of sight, out of smell, and out of reach of most bugs. It's not just about dignity, it's about dodging the swarm. Despite all that, some cultures actually embraced insects as part of natural burial. Sky burials in Tibet and Mongolia involve placing a body outdoors for vultures and insects to consume, seen as a way of giving back to the cycle of life. In some traditions, leaving bodies exposed was normal, allowing bugs and scavengers to do their work. Today, green burials echo that idea, with unembalmed bodies placed in biodegradable shrouds, allowing natural decomposition, including insects, to happen. The bug invasion, then, isn't always seen as horror. Sometimes it's respected as nature's cleanup crew. For all the grotesque detail, it's worth stepping back and realizing how extraordinary insects are in this role. Blowflies and beetles have evolved alongside vertebrates for millions of years, perfectly tuned to recycle carcasses. Their life cycles match ours in eerie harmony. We die, they arrive, they reproduce, and their offspring thrive on our tissues. It's a partnership, though we're not exactly the willing half of it. Still, without them, ecosystems would collapse. Imagine forests piled high with animal corpses that never broke down. Insects prevent that dystopia. They're unsung heroes, even if they make our stomachs churn. Philosophically, the bug invasion strips away any remaining illusions of permanence. Balloon mode may make you look strange, but with bugs, you stop looking human altogether. Your food, habitat, and nursery. Your individuality dissolves as thousands of tiny lives consume you and turn you into theirs. It's disturbing, yes, but it's also a reminder that we're all part of something bigger. Life doesn't stop when you stop. It shifts, transfers, and carries on in the buzzing wings of flies and the crawling bodies of maggots. You are not wasted. You are transformed. So what happens when the bug invasion begins? Flies land, lay eggs, and maggots burst forth to devour soft tissues. Beetles crawl in to gnaw on tougher parts. Ants, spiders, and scavengers join the party. Your body becomes a thriving ecosystem, a writhing colony, a buffet that ensures nutrients cycle back into the environment. It may look and smell horrifying to us, but to the natural world, it's business as usual. Bugs don't see you as tragic or sacred. They see you as lunch, and in serving that role, you keep the cycle of life spinning. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. The bug invasion is gross, creepy, and unsettling, but it's also proof of nature's efficiency. You spent your whole life building a body. In death, that body becomes fuel for countless other creatures. They'll carry you forward, molecule by molecule, until nothing remains but bones. Flies, maggots, beetles, they are death's cleanup crew, and they never miss a shift. If you've stuck with me through balloon mode and the bug invasion, then congratulations, you've earned a nose plug, because now we've entered one of the strangest and smelliest stages of the decomposition journey. By this point, your body has cooled, stiffened, bloated, leaked, and crawled with maggots. You'd think that would be enough humiliation, but nature isn't finished yet. Now it's time for mold, fermentation, and the kind of smell that will forever change the way you look at a grocery store cheese aisle. Welcome to the mold and mush phase, where you dry out in places, rot in others, and release aromas so pungent they've been compared to rancid butter, sweaty feet, and spoiled parmesan. The process that defines this stage is called butyric fermentation. If that sounds like something from a brewery, you're not too far off. Fermentation is what makes bread rise, beer bubble, and yogurt taste tangy. Butyric fermentation, however, is the sinister cousin of those happy kitchen processes. Instead of yeast working on barley, it's bacteria working on your decomposing tissues. And instead of giving you a delicious pint of craft beer, it gives you a smell so powerful it can knock someone backward. Butyric acid, the main byproduct, is the culprit. In small controlled doses, it's found in things like butter and cheese. In uncontrolled doses, like inside your rotting body, it's a horror show for the nose. By this time, the initial liquefaction caused by bacteria and maggots has slowed down. Much of the soft tissue has been eaten away or drained out as purge fluid. Your body, especially the parts exposed to air, starts to dry out. Skin becomes leathery and dark, like jerky. Insects move on to other food sources, leaving behind drier scraps. But inside the body and along the moist parts touching the ground, microbes keep working. They shift gears, switching from the earlier explosive putrefaction into this slower fermentation process. Imagine your body as a giant, stinky compost heap, bubbling quietly as new chemical reactions take over. The mold makes its debut now too. Wherever your body is pressed against soil, wood, or even concrete, moisture accumulates. That dampness creates the perfect conditions for fungi to grow. White, green, or black fuzz may spread across skin, clothing, or hair. It's the same kind of mold you'd see on bread left out too long, only instead of ruining your sandwich, it's decorating your corpse. Mold spores are everywhere in the environment, floating invisibly in the air, waiting for a place to land and feed. A dead body, especially one already rich with fluids and partially broken down tissue, is prime real estate. Within days, you can be sprouting fungal colonies like a science experiment gone wrong. The combination of mold growth and butyric fermentation gives this stage its nickname, the cheese smell phase. The odor is unmistakable, sharp, sour, rancid, with a weirdly familiar undertone that reminds you of a sweaty gym sock dipped in spoiled yogurt. Scientists have actually analyzed the chemical profile of this smell, finding overlaps with compounds that give cheese its tang. But before you swear off cheese forever, remember that concentration matters. A little butyric acid in butter or aged cheese is delicious. A lot of it, fermenting inside a decomposing body, is enough to make even seasoned professionals gag. Visually, mold and mush lives up to its name. The drying parts of your body begin to collapse inward, shriveling into husks. Fingers and toes wrinkle, skin cracks, and exposed bones may begin to peek through. In contrast, the moist areas touching the ground stay mushy, slimy, and coated in fungal fuzz. The result is a patchwork appearance, part mummy, part compost heap. The smell completes the effect, ensuring no one could mistake this stage for anything other than advanced decomposition. If balloon mode was theatrical horror, mold and mush is quiet, lingering dread. From a forensic perspective, this stage is less dramatic than bloating or maggot swarms, but still useful. The presence of mold, the texture of tissues, and the intensity of the butyric odor all provide clues about how long a body has been decomposing. Generally, this phase kicks in after about 3 to 4 weeks in temperate climates, though heat and humidity can speed it up. In cold or dry conditions, the body might bypass mushiness altogether and go straight into mummification, drying out before fungi get a foothold. On the other hand, in damp environments like forests or basements, mold growth can be rampant, covering the body in fuzzy blankets of spores. Historically, this stage terrified people in a different way. Before refrigeration and embalming were common, bodies often lingered in homes before burial. Families sitting with their dead loved ones would have noticed the shift from bloated and leaky to smelly and mouldy. That unforgettable cheese odor would have filled small rooms, and mold patches would creep across skin and clothing. It's no wonder burial rituals evolved quickly to get the body into the ground before mold and mush set in. Ancient cultures often included incense, herbs, or flowers in funeral rites, not just for symbolic reasons, but to mask the smell of butyric fermentation. Culturally, mold on a corpse has also inspired myths and metaphors. Mold was seen as corruption, a visible sign that the soul had departed and the body was being reclaimed by the earth. Writers and poets described it as nature's handwriting, scrawling across skin to mark the passage of time. In horror folklore, mouldy bodies in crypts became the imagery of restless spirits, their fungal bloom mistaken for signs of haunting. In reality, it's just spores and humidity doing what they always do. If you've ever cleaned a damp basement, you already know mold doesn't need ghosts to show up. It just needs moisture. On a scientific level, butyric fermentation fascinates researchers because of how it changes the chemical profile of decomposition. Early stages produce gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide. By the time fermentation dominates, the volatile compounds shift toward fatty acids and esters. These molecules not only stink, but also seep into surrounding soil, changing its chemistry. Forensic teams studying grave sites can detect these compounds years later, long after the body has decomposed completely. In that way, mold and mush leaves a chemical footprint, marking the earth where a body once lay. If you could zoom in microscopically during this phase, you'd see bacteria still munching away, but now slower, more deliberate, producing acids rather than explosive gases. Fungal hyphae, those thread-like structures, would snake through tissues, breaking down complex molecules into simpler ones. It's quiet destruction, less dramatic than maggots or bursting bellies, but just as relentless. The tissue softens, collapses, and eventually disintegrates into mush that seeps into the ground. Meanwhile, mold spores launch into the air, spreading far and wide, ready to colonize the next damp surface they find. The sensory assault of this stage, sight, smell, and even touch, makes it unforgettable for those who work with the dead. Morticians sometimes describe butyric phase bodies as the hardest to prepare because the odor clings stubbornly to everything, and the mushy consistency makes handling tissues difficult. Crime scene cleaners also dread this stage because purge fluids and fungal growth can soak into floors, walls, and carpets, leaving behind stubborn stains and smells. You don't just mop up mold and mush, you battle it. Philosophically, this stage is where individuality really disappears. Earlier in decomposition, you still looked vaguely human, stiff, bloated, or even crawling with bugs, but still recognizably you. By the time butyric fermentation and mold take over, the body has lost its structure. Mush replaces muscle, mold obscures features. The smell is so alien, it feels like it belongs to another world. Loved ones wouldn't recognize you by sight, and they certainly wouldn't want to by smell. It's confronting, but also clarifying. The person is gone, and what remains is simply organic matter being recycled. And yet, there's a strange poetry in it. The mold growing on you is the same kind that grows on bread or cheese, the same organisms that flavor foods and break down forest litter. The acids bubbling inside you are the same ones that make butter taste buttery. Your death is not separate from life. It's part of the same microbial symphony that runs the world. Mold and mush may feel like horror, but it's also connection. You're feeding the soil, nourishing fungi, and continuing the endless loop of matter and energy. So what happens in this phase? You dry out, you sprout fuzz, and you stink like a forgotten dairy aisle. Bacteria switch gears, producing butyric acid. Mold blooms on skin, hair, and clothing. Mush replaces muscle in moist areas, while leathery patches form in dry ones. The air fills with the sharp tang of decay, unmistakable and unforgettable. Insects move on, leaving fungi to finish the job. You are no longer a person, no longer even a corpse. Your compost in progress, cheese factory in motion, mold colony in bloom. It may not be glamorous, but it's important. Without mold and fermentation, decomposition would stall and nutrients would stay locked up. Instead, your atoms are being dismantled and sent back into circulation. Your molecules will feed plants, fungi, insects, and eventually animals. You might discuss the humans who stumble across you, but to the rest of the natural world, you're invaluable. Mold and mush is not the end. It's the middle act of a much longer recycling story. And that's the strange comfort in all this. Yes, you'll smell like rancid cheese. Yes, you'll sprout fuzzy green patches. Yes, you'll collapse into mush that seeps into the earth. But in doing so, You'll complete your role in the grand cycle of life. You won't be wasted. You'll be transformed, even if the process makes everyone else hold their noses. By the time you reach the skeletonization stage, you've already gone through the whole circus of death: cooling, stiffening, blood blotches, bloating, leaking, crawling maggots, mold fuzz, and cheese smells. If the earlier chapters were like the warm-up acts in a grotesque carnival, skeletonization is the finale, the quiet, eerie closing number. The soft tissues that once gave you shape, expression, and warmth are gone, stripped away by bacteria, bugs, scavengers, and time. What's left is the bare architecture of your body, the scaffolding that carried you through life, but never got much of the spotlight. Skeletonization is when the flesh is history, and you've officially joined the ranks of dusty skulls and bones scattered across the earth. The journey to skeletonization starts once the last bits of tissue collapse under the combined assault of microbes and insects. Insects are the champions here, especially beetles that specialize in gnawing on tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. While flies and maggots love the soft, juicy stuff in earlier stages, dermestid beetles come in late, patiently chewing through tougher tissues that others can't manage. Their larvae burrow into dried muscle, nibble on ligaments, and eventually leave behind only bones. This is why museums and forensic labs sometimes use colonies of dermestid beetles to clean skeletons. They're nature's most meticulous janitors. They strip away every last scrap of tissue without damaging the bones underneath. It's gross, but incredibly efficient. Outdoors, scavengers also play a role in getting you to your skeletal self. Birds, rodents, and larger animals may gnaw on your remains, not just for food, but also for the minerals in your bones. Rodents, for example, will chew on skeletal material to keep their ever-growing teeth filed down and to extract calcium. Foxes, coyotes, dogs, and even cats might tug at tendons or scatter bones across a wide area. This is why skeletons in the wild are rarely neatly laid out. Instead, they're often spread around, with skulls in one place, ribs in another, and femurs dragged off to who knows where. Nature doesn't respect human anatomy textbooks. It rearranges you however it wants. The timeline for skeletonization varies enormously depending on conditions. In hot, humid climates with abundant insects, a body can be reduced to bones in as little as a few weeks. In dry, arid deserts, the flesh may dry into a mummy-like state, delaying skeletonization for months or even years. In cold environments, where microbial and insect activity slows to a crawl, skeletonization may take decades. Burial also matters. A body left on the surface will skeletonize much faster than one sealed in a coffin or encased in stone. That's why archaeologists sometimes unearth skeletons that are thousands of years old, preserved underground long after soft tissue has vanished. Skeletonization isn't just about losing soft tissue, it's also about what happens to the bones themselves. At first, the skeleton looks white or yellowish, still greasy with marrow and lipids that seep from bone cavities. Over time, exposure to sun, rain, and soil changes the color. Bones outdoors may bleach white in the sun or darken to brown and black if buried in rich soil. Minerals in the environment can seep into bone, staining it red, green, or even blue, depending on the chemistry of the ground. Archaeologists have found bones with greenish hues from copper or reddish ones from iron in the soil. Your skeleton is not static. It keeps reacting to the world long after you've gone. Eventually, bones themselves begin to break down. They're made mostly of collagen and hydroxyapatite, a mineral form of calcium phosphate. Microbes and fungi can digest the collagen, while acidic soils can dissolve the mineral. In the right conditions, bones can crumble to dust within a century. In other environments, especially arid caves or peat bogs, bones can last for thousands of years. Fossilization is the extreme case, where minerals completely replace the organic components, turning bones into stone. That's how we end up with dinosaur skeletons millions of years later. For most of us, though, we'll be lucky if our bones last a few hundred years before the Earth reclaims them. From a forensic science perspective, skeletonization is both frustrating and fascinating. Without soft tissue, many clues about time and cause of death disappear. You can't easily read liver mortis blotches, rigor mortis stiffness, or internal organ damage when there are no organs left. But bones tell their own stories. Forensic anthropologists can estimate age, sex, ancestry, height, and sometimes even medical history from skeletal remains. Healed fractures, dental work, and bone density provide biographical details. In some cases, weapon marks leave grooves or fractures in bones, revealing causes of death long after the flesh has rotted. Skeletons are silent, but they're far from mute. Skeletonization also holds a strange place in human culture. Bones have always been symbols of mortality, reminders of the inevitability of death. Skulls appear in art, literature, and religion worldwide. From the Mexican Dia de los Muertos celebrations to European memento mori paintings. Monks in medieval Europe kept skulls on their desks to remind themselves of life's brevity. Pirates flew the Jolly Roger to strike fear with skeletal imagery. Even Halloween decor leans heavily on bones because nothing says death more universally than a grinning skull. Skeletonization is not just a biological stage, it's a cultural icon. Philosophically, skeletonization is oddly dignified compared to the messy chaos of earlier stages. The bloating, leaking, and maggots may horrify, but bones are strangely clean and quiet. Stripped of soft tissue, you're reduced to a universal form shared by every human who ever lived. A skeleton doesn't carry your smile, your wrinkles, or your scars. It's anonymous, timeless, and eerily uniform. That's why skeletons are so powerful in art. They erase individuality and remind us of the common fate we all share. When flesh is gone, the only difference between a king and a beggar is the arrangement of calcium and phosphate left behind. On a more intimate level, skeletonization represents the final separation between body and identity. Early decomposition stages still resemble a person. You can see faces, touch hands, recognize features. By the time only bones remain, recognition is nearly impossible. The person you knew is gone, and what's left is evidence, artifact, relic. Families who donate bodies to science sometimes take comfort in this, knowing the remains will eventually be studied, catalogued, and respected as skeletal specimens. Archaeologists, too, view skeletons less as individuals and more as windows into past populations. Skeletonization strips away personal identity and replaces it with scientific universality. Yet skeletons can be strangely beautiful. The human skeleton is a marvel of engineering, with 206 bones arranged in perfect balance for movement and strength. The curvature of the spine, the ball and socket joints of the hips and shoulders, the intricate carpals and tarsals in hands and feet, all of it speaks to millions of years of evolution. Artists and medical students alike admire skeletons not just as symbols of death, but as structures of elegance. To reach skeletonization is, in a way, to be revealed at your most fundamental. You are no longer flesh, no longer personality. You are structure, design, form. Even so, skeletonization is not the end. Over decades, bones break down, scatter, and return to the soil. Calcium feeds plants, phosphorus enriches the ground, and the cycle continues. Long after your skeleton has been picked clean by beetles and gnawed by rodents, its molecules will be absorbed into the ecosystem. Maybe a tree will take up your calcium, or a bird will use it in an eggshell. Eventually, even your bones will stop being bones, and you'll be scattered into countless other living forms. Skeletonization is just a pit stop in the endless recycling of matter. So what happens when you skeletonize? Your soft tissue disappears, devoured by bugs, microbes, and scavengers. Beetles chew tendons, rodents gnaw bones and weather stains and cracks your remains. Weeks, months, or years later, only bones are left, lying in the dirt, bleaching in the sun, or buried in the soil. You've gone from a warm, complex organism to a silent framework, a pile of calcium phosphate that whispers of the life you once lived. And in that final transformation, you become both less and more. Less of an individual, more of a symbol. Less of a person, more of a reminder. It may sound grim, but there's a strange peace in skeletonization. After all the leaking, swelling, crawling, and stinking, bones are quiet. They don't smell, they don't move. They just rest, slowly crumbling into dust. Skeletonization is not glamorous, but it's inevitable, and in its starkness, it's oddly comforting. Every person who has ever lived has ended here, and every person who ever will live will join them. Flesh is temporary. Bones last a little longer. Dust lasts forever. By the time you're reduced to bones, you might think the journey's over. Flesh is gone, insects have had their feast, mold has done its work, and now all that's left is the quiet dignity of your skeleton resting in the soil. But bones don't get a free pass to eternity. They're tough, sure, but they're not indestructible. The next chapter of your post-mortem career depends on a whole cast of environmental factors: soil, moisture, pH, temperature, scavengers, and just plain luck. Depending on the circumstances, your skeleton might last centuries, preserved like a time capsule, or it might crumble to dust in just a few decades. And in extremely rare cases, you might even become something far more enduring, a fossil locked in stone for millions of years, the ultimate VIP backstage pass to immortality. The question is, fossil or dust? Which fate will your bones choose? First, let's talk about what bones are really made of. They're not just sticks of stone rattling around under your skin. Each bone is a composite material, part organic and part mineral. The organic part is collagen, a protein that gives bones flexibility and toughness. The mineral part is hydroxyapatite, a crystalline form of calcium phosphate that gives bones their rigidity. Together, they form a balance, strong enough to support your weight, flexible enough to absorb shocks. But once you're dead, the balance starts to fail. Without blood circulation and living cells to repair micro-damage, collagen begins to break down. Microbes and fungi can slowly digest it, and soil acidity can dissolve the mineral crystals. Over time, your bones lose density, becoming chalky, brittle, and prone to crumbling. The soil you end up in makes all the difference. Acidic soil is your worst enemy. In places where the ground is rich in organic acids, like peat bogs, forest floors, or certain agricultural areas, bones can dissolve in just a few decades. Archaeologists often find only stains or shadows where skeletons once were, the minerals leached away by acidic groundwater. Neutral or alkaline soils are kinder, allowing bones to last for centuries or even millennia. That's why we still uncover skeletons from Roman times, medieval cemeteries, or ancient battlefields. The earth literally dictates whether you become dust in a generation or a relic for future archaeologists to puzzle over. Moisture is another key factor. Constantly wet conditions speed up decay, washing minerals out of the bone and encouraging microbial growth. But oddly enough, extremely waterlogged environments can also preserve bones in unique ways. In bogs, for example, the acidic, low-oxygen conditions often dissolve bones entirely while preserving soft tissue like skin and hair. That's why famous bog bodies sometimes still have intact faces, but no skeleton underneath. On the flip side, extremely dry conditions, like deserts or caves, can desiccate bones and keep them intact for thousands of years. The lack of moisture halts microbial activity and keeps minerals stable. Your bones might dry into fragile but long-lasting relics, surviving long after everything else has rotted away. Temperature matters too. Heat accelerates chemical reactions, so in hot climates, bones break down faster. Cold, on the other hand, slows everything down, preserving bones for much longer. Permafrost, the permanently frozen ground of the Arctic, has held onto mammoth bones for tens of thousands of years. In some cases, those bones still contain traces of collagen and DNA, enough for scientists to study and even fantasize about cloning. If you happen to die in a frozen tundra, your bones might be around for future civilizations to marvel at. If you die in the tropics, though, you'll probably be dust before your great-great-grandchildren are born. But what about fossilization, the holy grail of post-mortem preservation? Fossils are not just bones lying around. They're bones that have undergone a radical transformation. Over thousands to millions of years, groundwater-carrying minerals seeps into the bone. The original organic and mineral components dissolve bit by bit and are replaced by new minerals like silica, calcite, or iron. This process, called permineralization, turns the bone into stone. The shape and structure are preserved, but chemically, it's no longer bone. It's rock wearing a bone costume. That's why dinosaur fossils feel heavy and stony compared to fresh or ancient bones. They're not bones anymore, they're geological sculptures. The odds of fossilization happening to you are astronomically low. First, you'd need to be buried quickly after death, before scavengers, weather, or microbes destroy your skeleton. Second, you'd need to be in the right kind of sediment, one with minerals in groundwater that can seep into and replace your tissues. Third, you'd need to stay buried for thousands to millions of years without being destroyed by erosion, earthquakes, or human activity. Finally, you'd need someone in the distant future to dig you up and recognize you as a fossil. That's a lot of conditions to line up. Most humans will never fossilize, will crumble, scatter, and vanish. But for the lucky few, the path of fossilization is possible. Imagine being discovered in 5 million years, not as dust, but as a stone relic, admired in a museum exhibit titled Homo sapiens, 21st century. Immortality through geology. There are rare but real examples of human fossilization. Some prehistoric hominins have fossilized in caves where minerals dripped slowly over their remains, encasing them in stone. The famous Australopithecus skeleton, nicknamed Lucy, is a fossil, her bones mineralized and preserved for over 3 million years. Even more recently, some humans have been fossilized in volcanic ash or mineral-rich springs. But these cases are exceptions, not rules. For the average person, bones last only as long as the soil and climate allow. Fossils are lottery winners. Dust is the default. Scavengers also play their part in determining your fate. Long before soil chemistry has a chance to act, animals may gnaw on your bones, scattering and damaging them. Hyenas, wolves, rodents, and even domestic dogs chew bones for their calcium and phosphorus. Marks from their teeth can last for decades or centuries, leaving archaeologists clues about what happened after death. Sometimes bones end up dragged into dens, caves, or burrows, where they're preserved in unusual conditions. Other times they're left exposed, weathered by sun and rain until they crumble into flakes. The environment isn't always gentle. It tears you apart before deciding whether to keep you or erase you. Forensic scientists studying modern skeletons often see how fast bones can degrade in everyday conditions. In temperate climates, exposed bones may start to crack and flake within just a few years. Insects and microbes burrow into the marrow cavity, speeding decay. Within a few decades, bones can fragment into chalky dust, especially smaller bones like ribs and vertebrae. Larger bones, like femurs and skulls, last longer, but even they eventually give in. Dust to dust isn't just a poetic phrase, it's a literal description of what happens. On the other hand, burial in protective environments can give bones a long afterlife. Archaeologists regularly uncover skeletal remains thousands of years old, from Neolithic farmers to Egyptian mummies. In caves or tombs, bones can last astonishingly well, shielded from weather and scavengers. Sometimes they're so well preserved that DNA can still be extracted, giving us a genetic window into the past. Bones are fragile but resilient. Fragile in the short term, but resilient in the right conditions. Your fate depends less on who you were and more on where you end up. Culturally, skeletons turning to dust has always been a powerful image. Religious texts speak of returning to the earth, of dust reclaiming the body. Fossils, meanwhile, have inspired awe and confusion throughout history. Ancient people who stumbled across massive fossilized bones sometimes thought they belonged to giants or dragons. Today, fossils connect us to deep time, to creatures that lived millions of years before us. If your bones ever fossilize, you wouldn't just be remembered. You'd become part of Earth's geological record, a permanent page in the planet's story. Philosophically, the contrast between fossilization and dust is stark. Dust means oblivion. You vanish, your atoms scattered into soil, air, and plants. Fossilization means endurance. You persist, not as yourself, but as a shape, a memory, a geological echo. Both outcomes are part of nature's recycling system, but one feels fleeting while the other feels monumental. Yet even dust has its beauty. In becoming dust, you nourish life immediately, feeding plants and microbes. Fossils, meanwhile, wait patiently, silent and untouched, until someone discovers them. Both are transformations, just on different timelines. So what happens after skeletonization? Your bones begin their own countdown. In acidic soil, they dissolve. In neutral soil, they linger. In dry caves, they can last millennia. In rare conditions, minerals seep in and turn them to stone, immortalizing your skeleton as a fossil. Most of us will be dust long before we're remembered as fossils, but the possibility exists, however small, that one day you'll sit in a glass case while schoolchildren press their faces to the glass and stare in awe. You won't know it, of course, but it's a kind of immortality all the same. Whether you become fossil or dust, the process is out of your hands. It's written in soil, climate, and chance. Either way, your bones complete their role in the cycle of life and death. If you crumble to dust, you return quickly to the earth. If you fossilize, you linger as a stone ghost of yourself for ages. Dust or fossil, it's all just matter transforming, shifting, moving on. That's the truth of it. When you're gone, your bones are just one more stop on nature's endless recycling journey. By the time your body has reached bones, dust, or fossil, you might think the story is finished. But the truth is, the real story of you doesn't end with bones. It doesn't even end with dust. Your body is more than skin, muscle, and calcium scaffolding. You are, and always were, a collection of atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, iron, stardust forged in ancient stars long before Earth even existed. And those atoms don't stop existing just because you do. They scatter, they wander, and they continue on adventures you'll never know. This is the chapter of death, where you dissolve into the cosmic recycling center, where every piece of you becomes part of soil, rivers, air, plants, animals, and maybe even new people. Think of it like this. Right now, as you breathe, you're inhaling molecules of oxygen that may have once been inside a dinosaur or a medieval knight. or an ancient tree. The carbon in your bones might once have drifted as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of Earth millions of years ago, only to be trapped in plants, eaten by animals, and eventually woven into you. You are already a patchwork of recycled atoms from across the ages. Death just returns those atoms back to the cycle, ready for someone or something else to borrow them. Nothing is wasted, nothing vanishes. You simply scatter. The scattering begins small. As your tissues break down, bacteria release gases like carbon dioxide and methane into the air. That carbon may drift upward into the atmosphere, becoming part of the global climate system. One carbon atom from your body could circle the globe in a matter of weeks, carried by wind currents, dissolved in rain, and then absorbed by the leaf of a tree. That tree might use your carbon atom to build glucose during photosynthesis, locking a tiny part of you into a leaf or a branch. Later, a deer might eat that leaf. Later still, a wolf might eat the deer. Your carbon atom, once part of your muscle, could be bounding through the forest as part of an animal's stride. The recycling is endless. Water atoms in your body follow similar paths. You're made of about 60% water, and when you decompose, much of that returns to the soil. Some evaporates, joining clouds, then rains back down miles away. Hydrogen and oxygen atoms that once carried your blood might now rush down rivers, churn in ocean waves, or freeze into glaciers. In a very real sense, you could be part of a raindrop falling in a rainforest centuries from now, or part of the tide rolling into a beach on another continent. Your water doesn't die with you, it just changes homes. The minerals in your bones are another story. Calcium and phosphorus, once locked into hydroxyapatite crystals, seep into soil as bones crumble. Plants absorb them through their roots, using them to grow strong stems or vibrant flowers. Animals nibbling on those plants incorporate the minerals into their own bones and teeth. A single calcium atom from your femur might one day strengthen the beak of a bird or the tusk of an elephant. Over geological time, those same atoms could be washed into oceans, deposited as sediments, and transformed into limestone. Entire mountains could contain tiny traces of you, hidden in layers of rock, waiting to be revealed millions of years later. Even trace elements in your body, iron, zinc, copper, find their way back into circulation. The iron that once carried oxygen in your blood might become part of rust in soil, part of chlorophyll in plants, or part of another person's hemoglobin centuries down the line. The copper from your nervous system might one day sit in the bloodstream of a fish. The atoms don't know or care where they are. They simply move, endlessly shuffled through the chemistry of life and Earth. Insects and scavengers play a role in spreading you too. Maggots that fed on your tissues grow into flies, carrying molecules of you in their tiny bodies as they buzz away. Beetles that chewed on your tendons crawl into the soil and die themselves, their atoms mixing with yours underground. Vultures that picked at your remains soar for miles, redistributing your matter far beyond where you fell. You don't stay in one place for long. Your atoms are travelers, hitchhiking on wings, rivers, winds, and roots. From a scientific point of view, this stage is just biogeochemical cycling. Carbon cycles through air, soil, and organisms. Nitrogen cycles through proteins, bacteria, and plants. Phosphorus cycles through rocks, soil, and animals. It's the same system that's been running for billions of years. Every atom in your body has been on countless journeys before you borrowed it. They've been through volcanoes, oceans, forests, and other organisms. Death just hands the atoms back to the cycle. You're not gone, you're redistributed. From a cosmic perspective, it gets even wilder. The atoms that make up your body were forged in the hearts of stars. Billions of years ago, massive stars fused hydrogen into heavier elements like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. When those stars exploded as supernovas, they scattered their guts into space, seeding the universe with the building blocks of life. Earth formed from that star stuff, and so did you. When you die, your atoms don't lose their origin story. They're still stardust. They still carry the history of cosmic fire. And one day, far in the future, some of those atoms may be blasted off Earth again, by volcanoes, by meteor impacts, maybe even by humanity's own spacefaring ambitions. Your atoms could ride a comet, drift into interstellar space, and join the raw material of future solar systems. Death on Earth could be the beginning of life elsewhere. It's humbling and liberating to realize you don't really disappear. You diffuse. A person who knew you won't see your face again, but they might inhale a breath of air that contains oxygen you once carried. They might plant a tree in soil that holds your calcium. They might drink water that includes hydrogen from your body. You live on, not as yourself, but as parts of everything. The eternal particles don't die. They move. Even cremation, which seems to destroy the body instantly, is just another form of scattering. Flames break down organic matter into gases that rise into the atmosphere. The ashes left behind are minerals, calcium, potassium, sodium, that can be scattered in fields, oceans, or forests. Those minerals join soil chemistry, feeding plants, enriching ecosystems. Cremation doesn't end the story. It just speeds up the scattering. Burial, in contrast, slows the process, letting microbes and soil chemistry take their time. Either way, the atoms eventually return to circulation. Philosophically, this stage blurs the line between you and everything else. You may think of yourself as separate from the world, but decomposition proves otherwise. You are always part of a larger system, borrowing atoms temporarily. When you return them, they don't vanish. They continue the endless dance of matter. Dust to dust isn't just poetic, it's scientifically accurate. And stardust to stardust might be even more fitting. The idea that you become part of soil and rivers isn't just metaphorical. Farmers know that compost enriches crops, and bodies too eventually enrich soil. Green burial movements highlight this truth, encouraging unembalmed bodies to return nutrients to the earth naturally. In such burials, within a few years, the person is fully broken down, their atoms scattered into plants, fungi, and soil organisms. You might literally become part of a tree, part of a flower, part of a bird that eats the seeds. You may not be conscious of it, but your body feeds the living. And if you want to think even bigger, your atoms don't just scatter locally, they become part of planetary systems. Carbon from your body might contribute in the tiniest way to climate patterns. Calcium from your bones might become part of mountain ranges. Oxygen from your tissues might cycle through the oceans, influencing marine ecosystems. The eternal particles that once spelled out you are resorted into endless new patterns. You've been dissolved into the fabric of Earth itself. From a personal perspective, this stage can feel eerie, but also comforting. People often fear the idea of vanishing, but atoms don't vanish. They move on. You may no longer be an individual, but you're still here, scattered across the world, carried in the air and soil, living in new forms. You could be in a sunflower, in a river trout, in a future child's breath. The eternal particles don't care about identity. They just keep moving, creating new stories long after your own has ended. So what happens when you become eternal particles? Your carbon drifts into the air, your water seeps into rivers, your calcium enriches the soil, and your trace elements find new homes in plants, animals, rocks, and oceans. You might become part of the food chain, part of the climate system, part of a mountain, or part of a star. You never really stop. You just change form, endlessly recycled by the cosmic system that has been running since the beginning of time. Fossil or dust, burial or cremation, the endpoint is the same, scattering into everything. Death feels like an end, but the eternal particles remind us it's just a handoff. You give your atoms back to the universe, and the universe keeps going. In a billion years, no one will remember your name, but your atoms will still be here, rearranged, reshuffled, woven into new forms. You're temporary, but the matter that made you is forever. You don't disappear, you just spread out. And that might be the closest thing we have to immortality. By now, we've spent a lot of time walking through what naturally happens to your body after death. Cooling down, stiffening up, bloating, leaking, rotting, being eaten by bugs, and eventually crumbling into bones and dust. It's messy, smelly, and absolutely undignified. And here's the thing. Humans figured that out a long time ago. Nobody wanted Grandma to explode in balloon mode in the living room. Nobody wanted Uncle Bob to sprout mold fuzz at the family wake. From the very beginning of civilization, we've been inventing clever, ritualistic, and sometimes downright weird ways to keep the gross part of decomposition at bay. Burial, cremation, and mummification aren't just cultural quirks. They're humanity's strategies for coping with the universal fact that death stinks, literally. Let's start with burial, the most widespread and historically enduring method of dealing with the dead. On the surface, burial looks simple. Dig a hole, put the body in, cover it with dirt. But even that simple act has layers of meaning and science. Practically, burial gets the body out of sight, under the ground where scavengers, insects, and family members don't have to deal with the smell and fluids. Spiritually, it ties into countless beliefs about returning to the earth, sleeping under soil, or awaiting resurrection. Archaeologists have found burials dating back tens of thousands of years, complete with tools, ornaments, and offerings. Even then, people knew bodies decomposed, and burying them was a way of containing the mess while honoring the person. Over centuries, burial evolved into an entire industry. Coffins and caskets weren't just for dignity, they slowed down insects and protected against soil pressure. Some were made of stone, metal, or hardwood, designed to outlast the body inside. Cemeteries became organized cities of the dead, with neat rows, monuments, and rituals. And then came embalming, the chemical upgrade to burial. By replacing body fluids with formaldehyde and other preservatives, morticians could delay decomposition long enough for funerals and viewings. In truth, embalming doesn't stop rot forever, it just presses pause for a while. But in cultures where saying goodbye involves seeing the body, embalming gave the living a chance to gather without holding their noses. Science slowed nature just enough to make mourning more manageable. Cremation takes a very different approach. Rather than slowing decomposition, it bypasses it entirely. Fire is the ultimate disinfectant. When a body is cremated at thousands of degrees Fahrenheit, soft tissues, fat, and fluids vanish in a matter of hours. Bones calcify, then shatter into fragments, which are ground into the ashes you see in urns. It's efficient, sanitary, and much faster than waiting years for microbes and insects to do the same job. Cultures across the world have embraced cremation for both practical and symbolic reasons. In ancient India, cremation was linked to the release of the soul from the body. In ancient Rome, it became the standard practice for emperors and commoners alike. Modern cremation boomed in the 19th and 20th centuries as cities struggled with overcrowded cemeteries and sanitation issues. Today, in many countries, more people are cremated than buried, simply because it's cheaper, cleaner, and doesn't require as much land. Still, cremation doesn't erase decomposition, it just speeds it up with flames instead of bacteria. The gases released are different, the smells are controlled by furnaces, but the chemistry is still the same. Carbon, water, and minerals breaking apart and rejoining the world. Even the ashes you scatter aren't really ashes in the wood-burning sense. They're mostly bone minerals that didn't vaporize, ground into a sandy powder. Cremation is just decomposition on fast forward, dressed up in fire. Then there's mummification, the most dramatic attempt humans ever made to stop decomposition entirely. Ancient Egyptians are the poster children for this process, turning death into an art form that blended chemistry, ritual, and sheer determination. They knew bodies rotted, smelled, and attracted bugs. Their solution was to remove the softest, most decay-prone parts first, the brain and internal organs. Then they dried out the body with natron, a natural salt that absorbed moisture. After weeks of drying, the body was wrapped in layer upon layer of linen, sealed with resins, and entombed in sarcophagi. The result was astonishing. Mummies that still have recognizable features thousands of years later. Pharaohs look almost lifelike, preserved in defiance of nature's normal timeline. Mummification wasn't unique to Egypt. The Chinchorro people of South America were practicing it thousands of years earlier, carefully preserving their dead with ash, clay, and sticks to maintain body shape. In the Andes, cold, dry air naturally mummified bodies left in mountaintop shrines. In Asia, Buddhist monks practice self-mummification through extreme diets and meditations, slowly dehydrating themselves until their bodies naturally resisted decay. Each culture had its own recipe, but the goal was the same: to hold decomposition at bay, to cheat the gross part and keep bodies intact for eternity, or at least long enough for religious or cultural meaning. Of course, not all mummification was intentional. Nature has its own methods of preservation. Ice mummies, like Ötzi the Iceman, were frozen solid in glaciers. Peat bogs, with their acidic, oxygen-poor environments, preserved skin and hair while dissolving bones. Deserts desiccated bodies into leathery husks. These natural mummies show that under the right conditions, the earth itself slows decomposition without human help. Cultures that stumbled across naturally preserved bodies often wove myths around them, seeing them as holy or cursed, proof that death could be delayed. No matter the method, burial, cremation, or mummification, the common thread is that humans couldn't stand to watch the natural process of decomposition in all its gory detail. Balloon mode, bug swarms, cheese smells, and collapsing mush aren't the stuff of sacred memory. Rituals arose to hide, hurry, or halt those stages. Burial hides it underground. Cremation hurries it with fire. Mummification halts it with salt, chemicals, or cold. Every culture has its way of saying, yes, decomposition is real, but we'd rather not watch it happen. Forensic scientists today study all these cultural practices with curiosity. Embalming changes the chemical profile of a body, slowing insect activity. Cremation leaves behind mineral traces that can be analyzed. Mummification preserves tissues that reveal ancient diets, diseases, and even tattoos. Archaeologists learn as much from how people handled their dead as from the dead themselves. The afterlife isn't just spiritual, it's cultural, chemical, and very, very practical. Philosophically, cultural afterlives reveal how humans balance horror with hope. We know decomposition is gross, smelly, and undignified, but we invent stories and rituals that transform it into something meaningful. Burials give us sacred ground to visit. Cremation gives us ashes to scatter in favorite places. Mummification gives us eternal bodies to marvel at. Each practice reframes decomposition, turning the mess into memory, the science into symbolism. We may not stop the bacteria, but we soften the reality with ritual. And that's the point. Cultural afterlives are less about the dead and more about the living. Once you're gone, you don't care if you're buried, burned, or salted into a mummy. The rituals are for the people left behind. to give them closure, to spare them from the grossest realities, and to let them feel like they've honored you properly. Whether you rot underground, rise as smoke, or lie wrapped in linen, the decomposition still happens in some form. But culture edits the script, hiding the scenes we'd rather not see. So what happens in the cultural afterlife? Some people go into the ground, slowly returning to soil while families place flowers above. Some go into fire, scattering into ash and smoke, their particles rising into air and water. Some, rare and ancient, are preserved as mummies, faces still staring back thousands of years later. Each path avoids the spectacle of natural decomposition, replacing it with ritual, meaning, and story. The gross part is handled, hidden, or transformed, and the living move forward with something to hold on to. At the end of the day, burial, cremation, and mummification are just humanity's way of saying, yes, death is messy, but we'd rather focus on the parts that bring us comfort. Decomposition is the science, ritual is the story, and both together make up the full picture of what happens after you die. So far, we've taken a guided tour through the scientific side of death. Cooling bodies, stiff muscles, bloating bellies, bugs chewing you like leftovers, and finally your atoms scattering into the grand recycling bin of the universe. Science can tell us a lot about what happens to the body, but it can't quite settle the question that has kept philosophers, priests, poets, and probably that one cousin at Thanksgiving awake at night for thousands of years. What happens to you? Not your skin, not your calcium, not your DNA. You. Your mind, your soul, your consciousness, whatever word you like to use for that little spark of self. Do you go somewhere? Do you come back? Do you stick around as a ghost with unfinished business? Or do you vanish into nothingness like blowing out a candle? Nobody knows for sure, but humanity has never let "we don't know" get in the way of a good theory. Let's start with heaven, because if you grew up anywhere near Western religion, that's the big one on the afterlife menu. Heaven is the all-inclusive resort of the cosmos, the place you allegedly check into if you've lived a good life, followed the rules, and resisted stealing your neighbor's Wi-Fi password. The details vary depending on which tradition you ask. In Christianity, it's golden streets, pearly gates, angel choirs, and eternal life in the presence of God. In Islam, it's Jannah, a lush paradise with flowing rivers, shade, and rewards tailored to each believer. Other traditions have their own versions, glorious realms free of suffering, pain, or bills. Heaven is appealing because it answers our deepest fear, that death is final. Instead, it promises a continuation, only better. No aches, no aging, no taxes, just forever. Of course, the catch is that getting in usually requires following the right spiritual path, which has led to centuries of debate, wars, and guilt-tripping sermons. Still, the idea of heaven remains one of the most comforting human inventions. But not everyone thinks the afterlife is a one-way trip upward. Enter reincarnation, the cosmic recycling program for souls. Instead of floating in paradise forever, your essence is reborn in a new body. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and other Eastern philosophies describe cycles of rebirth, where you might return as another human, an animal, or even something less glamorous, depending on your karma. Live selfishly, and maybe you come back as a dung beetle. Live generously, and maybe you come back as a sage. The ultimate goal is often to break free of this cycle altogether, reaching enlightenment or nirvana, the cosmic equivalent of graduating from school, so you never have to repeat another grade. Reincarnation is appealing because it gives life meaning beyond one shot. Your mistakes aren't permanent. You get another try, maybe infinite tries, to figure things out. On the downside, it also means you might spend centuries doing the cosmic equivalent of summer school if you keep messing up. Then there's the ghost theory, which is less formal but deeply embedded in every culture. The idea is simple. Sometimes when people die, they don't fully leave. Maybe they've got unfinished business. Maybe they're angry, lost, or too attached to their old house. Maybe they just like spooking teenagers with Ouija boards. Ghost stories appear everywhere. Victorian England had haunted manors. Japan has yurei. Mexico celebrates Dia de los Muertos with spirits returning to visit. And just about every town has that one creepy road where a ghostly hitchhiker supposedly appears. Scientifically, ghosts are hard to prove. Most evidence is blurry photos, weird feelings, or that one cousin who swears grandma still turns off the lights. But emotionally, ghosts make sense. They let us believe our loved ones might linger, watching over us, sending signs, or rattling the occasional chain for dramatic effect. Ghosts are scary, sure, but they're also comforting. They suggest we don't really leave entirely. Of course, there's one theory that doesn't promise heaven, rebirth, or hauntings. It's the nothingness option, the eternal blank screen. According to this idea, when you die, your consciousness stops. There's no dream, no tunnel of light, no reunion with long-lost pets. It's like before you were born, endless nothing. For some people, that thought is terrifying. The idea that everything you are, memories, jokes, opinions about pineapple on pizza, just blinks out forever is enough to send shivers down your spine. But others find it peaceful. No more stress, no more deadlines, no more worrying about what your hair looks like in Zoom meetings. Just infinite rest. The nothingness theory is brutally simple. Life is temporary, and when it's over, that's it. It may not be comforting, but it's honest in a way that resonates with many secular thinkers. There are, of course, hybrid theories, because humans love mixing belief systems. Some people believe in heaven, but also think ghosts hang around for a while before heading there, like travelers waiting for a delayed flight. Others like the idea of reincarnation, but blend it with karma light, imagining they'll come back as their favorite animal or in their favorite country. Some blend science and spirituality, suggesting that consciousness might be a kind of energy that doesn't disappear, but transforms in ways we don't yet understand. Physicists remind us that energy can't be destroyed, only changed. And some people run with that idea to argue that maybe our minds keep going in some mysterious form. It's not traditional religion, but it scratches the same itch, the desire for continuity. And let's be real, nobody knows. Spiritual theories are exactly that, theories. You can find near-death experiences where people describe floating tunnels of light, meeting relatives, or feeling overwhelming peace. Are those glimpses of heaven, or just the brain firing off chemicals as oxygen levels drop? You can find children who claim to remember past lives in eerie detail. Are those cases of reincarnation, or imaginative kids repeating stories they've overheard? You can find haunted houses with chilling accounts of footsteps, whispers, and cold spots. Are those restless spirits, or creaky pipes and overactive imaginations? Each theory has its fans, its skeptics, and its mysteries. What's fascinating is how universal the curiosity is. Every culture, from the earliest cave paintings to modern movies, has some story about what happens after death. Heaven, reincarnation, ghosts, and nothingness are just 4 big categories in a sprawling library of human imagination. The Vikings pictured Valhalla, a hall of endless feasting for warriors. Ancient Greeks imagined Hades, with different sections for heroes, villains, and average souls. Some indigenous traditions see death as a journey to join ancestors in the spirit world. Even in today's pop culture, we invent new afterlives. Video games where characters respawn, TV shows where the dead hang out in quirky heavens or bureaucratic underworlds. Death may be universal, but so is storytelling about what happens next. Philosophically, all these theories say more about the living than the dead. Heaven comforts the grieving with the idea of reunion. Reincarnation motivates people to live ethically, hoping for a better next round. Ghosts let us imagine our loved ones are still close by. Nothingness forces us to focus on the present, because this is all we get. Each belief system gives us tools to cope with the uncomfortable truth that none of us can escape death. Whether you pray, meditate, tell ghost stories, or shrug at the void, you're participating in humanity's oldest tradition, trying to make sense of the mystery we can't solve. And maybe that's the wink in all of this. We've dissected decomposition, traced gases, studied bugs, mapped bones, and watched atoms scatter. Science shows us what happens to the body with startling clarity. But the question of what happens to you is still open, and probably always will be. Maybe you'll walk streets of gold. Maybe you'll return as a stray cat in Paris. Maybe you'll rattle chains in your old house. Or maybe you'll rest in perfect silence. Each possibility has its own appeal, its own comfort, its own flavor of nightmare fuel. And until we take that final breath ourselves, the truth remains the greatest mystery of all. So what are the spiritual theories after death? Heaven offers paradise, reincarnation offers another chance, ghosts offer unfinished business, and nothingness offers rest. None are proven, all are debated, and every one of them shapes how we live while we're alive. Because ultimately, the stories we tell about death aren't just about dying. They're about finding reasons to keep going, loving, laughing, and maybe even believing that the end isn't really the end. After walking through all the stages of death, from cooling to bloating, from maggot buffets to skeletonization, you might be asking yourself, okay, but why do we need to know all this nightmare fuel? Isn't it enough to know that decomposition happens without memorizing every gruesome detail? Fair question. But here's the thing. This creepy stuff matters. Forensic science, archaeology, and even our understanding of history rely on it. Dead bodies, as grim as they may be, are some of the most important teachers we have. They solve crimes, unlock mysteries of the past, and give us glimpses into how humans have lived and died across millennia. The more we understand death's timeline, the more we can understand life itself. Let's start with forensic science, because nothing says why decomposition matters quite like a crime scene. Imagine detectives walking into a room and finding a body. The big question is immediate. How long has this person been dead? That's not just morbid curiosity. It's the key to cracking alibis, timelines, and suspects. If decomposition has advanced only a few hours, maybe the killer is still nearby. If the body has been there for weeks, the entire investigation shifts. Forensic pathologists rely on all the creepy details we've covered. Algor mortis, body cooling, rigor mortis, stiffening, liver mortis, blood pooling, bloating, insect activity, and more. To estimate time of death, it's like reading nature's clock, one tick mark at a time, except instead of hands on a watch, you're looking at stiff jaws, purple blotches, and squirming maggots. And maggots, believe it or not, they're some of the best witnesses in the world. Blowflies arrive at a corpse within minutes, lay eggs, and their larvae grow at predictable rates depending on temperature. Forensic entomologists, yes, scientists who specialize in bug evidence, can measure the size and stage of maggots to estimate death within a window of hours or days. In some cases, that's made the difference between convicting a murderer and letting them walk free. Bugs don't lie. They don't care about covering their tracks. They just eat and grow, and in doing so, they keep time better than most clocks. Creepy? Yes. Useful? Absolutely. Decomposition also reveals whether a body has been moved. Rigor mortis, those purple blotches from pooled blood, settle according to gravity. If blotches are on the back, but the body is found lying face down, investigators know someone tampered with the scene. Rigor mortis can also give clues. If a body is stiff in a pose that doesn't match its current position, it's a sign the corpse was shifted after stiffening. Even gases and purge fluids can tell a story. Forensic scientists can analyze chemical compounds released during decomposition to track the timeline and even the environment of death. Every stage, from rigor mortis to skeletonization, is another page in a diary that the body writes after life ends. Then there's archaeology, which is basically forensic science, but with a much older crime scene. Archaeologists studying ancient burials rely on decomposition science to piece together past lives. The condition of bones, the presence of mummified tissue, and even soil chemistry all tell stories. Skeletons can reveal how tall people were, what they ate, what diseases they suffered, and how they died. Sometimes they even show evidence of violence, sword cuts, arrowheads, or broken bones. In a way, decomposition science is the bridge between the present and the past. Without it, we wouldn't know nearly as much about how humans lived in different eras. Take bog bodies, for example. These naturally preserved corpses, found in peat bogs across Europe, are time capsules of Iron Age life. Their skin, hair, and even stomach contents are intact because of the unique chemical environment that halted decomposition. By studying them, archaeologists have learned about ancient diets, rituals, and even clothing. Creepy? Definitely. Important? Without a doubt. Or consider the mummies of Egypt, where intentional preservation has given us faces of pharaohs from thousands of years ago. By examining their tissues and bones, scientists have diagnosed conditions like arthritis, dental abscesses, and even heart disease in people who lived before modern medicine. Decomposition, or its interruption, is a window into history. Even mass graves from wars and disasters become crucial sources of information. Forensic anthropologists use decomposition science to identify victims, provide closure to families, and sometimes hold perpetrators accountable. The way bodies decompose in different environments, buried, burned, submerged, affects how evidence is preserved. By mastering this knowledge, scientists can recover names, causes of death, and even reconstruct the stories of entire communities. It's grim work, but it's also justice. And it doesn't stop there. Decomposition studies also help in modern humanitarian efforts. In natural disasters, plane crashes, or conflicts, recovery teams use knowledge of decomposition to identify remains quickly and respectfully. Time matters not just for solving crimes, but for bringing closure to grieving families. Knowing the timeline of death helps determine when an event occurred, which can be critical for legal and historical records. The science of rot, maggots, and mold becomes the science of compassion and closure. You might be surprised to learn that entire facilities exist just to study this process. They're called body farms, research sites where donated human remains are left to decompose in controlled environments. Scientists observe every stage of decay, from bloating to skeletonization, in different conditions: shaded woods, open fields, submerged in water, buried shallow or deep. The data they collect refines forensic timelines, trains law enforcement, and improves our ability to identify the dead. If that sounds like the creepiest farm you've ever heard of, that's because it is. But it's also one of the most important. Every decomposing body at a research facility adds to our collective ability to solve crimes and understand death. Culturally, understanding decomposition also helps us make sense of ancient rituals. Burial customs, cremation, and mummification weren't just symbolic, they were practical responses to the realities of rot. By studying how bodies naturally decompose, Anthropologists can interpret why different societies developed their unique practices. For example, why did Egyptians go all in on mummification while medieval Europeans buried their dead in churchyards? The answers often circle back to environment, religion, and the universal human desire to control or at least disguise the gross part of death. Even beyond science, decomposition shapes our language and imagination. Ghost stories often exaggerate the look of decomposed bodies, bloated, discolored, leaking fluids. Vampire myths were likely inspired by bloated corpses mistaken for undead beings. Zombies, too, are just walking metaphors for the stages of rot. Our horror stories are really just creative ways of processing what science already tells us happens after death. Knowing the facts doesn't kill the fear, but it explains where it comes from. Philosophically, studying decomposition reminds us that death is not just an end, but a process. Understanding how long it takes for a body to cool, stiffen, bloat, or skeletonize helps us accept the reality that we are biological beings subject to natural laws. It's humbling, maybe even unsettling, but it's also empowering. Knowledge strips away some of the mystery. Instead of imagining death as an instant vanishing act, we see it as a series of stages that connect us to ecosystems, history, and justice. And let's not ignore the humor in all this. Yes, death is heavy, but the details can be absurd. The idea that maggots are better timekeepers than your fancy smartwatch, hilarious in a gross way. The thought of balloon mode being mistaken for vampires in medieval Europe, pure nightmare comedy. Even the concept of a body farm sounds like something out of a dark cartoon. Rows of pumpkins here, decomposing cadavers there. If you can stomach the details, decomposition science is full of moments that make you shake your head and laugh nervously. So why does this creepy stuff matter? Because dead bodies aren't just endings, they're evidence, history books, and teachers. They solve crimes, preserve culture, and remind us that we're part of a bigger cycle. Every purple blotch, every stiff muscle, every squirming maggot adds data to the human record. The very things we find disgusting are the things that help us understand ourselves. When you die, your body won't just rot, it will write its final report. Forensic scientists might read it to solve a crime, archaeologists might read it to piece together history, anthropologists might read it to understand culture. Your body becomes a text written in decay, and those who can read it hold the keys to truth. Creepy? Absolutely. Important. More than you can imagine. Because in the end, decomposition isn't just about what happens to you after you die. It's about what your death teaches the living. That's why we study it. That's why it matters. And that's why the creepiest details, the bloating, the bugs, the mold, are also some of the most valuable. They turn horror into knowledge, loss into justice, and mystery into truth.